Chapter 116. Gunboat Diplomacy. XXXXX. A week's leave. Roger said, sounding as if he couldn't believe it. We get a freaking week's leave. That's correct, Miranda said. The Normandy was in dock at the Citadel, a high-priority dock that was among the closest to the Presidium, reserved for VIPs and those who could afford to pay top dollar for the rent. At the moment, the Normandy certainly qualified for the latter. The task force that had stormed the collector base was all gathered outside, with the exception of Shepard. Ashley couldn't help but look around for her captain. No doubt she was still in her cabin, wanting to be left alone until she was called up for her debriefing by Admirals Anderson and Hackett. A special arrangement has been made for active personnel arriving on the station, Miranda continued. Those who are on leave are permitted to keep their equipment while on leave in the event of an emergency. There was a rather nasty implication that hung in the air after Miranda said emergency. There was an unpleasant thought that Ashley could tell was passing through the minds of all present. It has been 2 weeks since hostilities had been brought to a temporary end, and representatives from all major governments had been flocking to the Citadel in order to attend the peace talks, large swathes of soldiers coming with them. President Woods had finally arrived earlier today, making her the last representative to reach the Citadel, meaning that the station was now filled with thousands of soldiers from governments that had been at war a mere 15 days ago. So why were soldiers allowed to keep their weapons when they weren't on active duty? It implied more than a few things, none of them pleasant to think about. Be warned though, Miranda said sternly. CSEC is on maximum alert. Practically every bar, brothel, and casino on the Citadel has officers swarming all over it, on the lookout for any soldiers that are causing trouble. Part of the peace talks included giving them authority to arrest members of armed forces if they starting causing trouble, and the right to shoot to kill if lives are at risk. So it doesn't matter how high emotions run, we're all guests on the Citadel at the moment. Hopefully you won't need to know any of this, but things are balancing on a razor's edge right now, Ashley added in. Go out, enjoy yourselves, and don't cause problems for yourself or anyone else. Do me a favor, make it so that I didn't need to tell any of you this. Dismissed. Almost at once, the Marines in the group, sans Roger, split off to the rest. Ashley could vaguely hear some mutterings about them honoring the dead and them looking for the right bar for the job. Ashley couldn't help but remember the last time alcohol and Marines had gotten mixed with Philo, and prayed that CSEC was up to snuff. Lieutenant, question. Ashley pushed her thoughts to the back of her mind to see Roger approaching her. You're on leave too, right? Ashley gave a brief nod. With the Normandy out of active combat and not needed anywhere, most of the paperwork being handled by coalition intelligence agents who were double and triple checking everything on the Normandy's hard drives with the help of EDI, she too had some time off. Well, if you're up for it, a lot of the others and I were talking about heading over to this pretty good place we heard about. It's called the Dark Star Lounge. It's a bit more classy than a lot of the bars around here, so I thought you might be interested. Ashley allowed herself a small smile. I seem to remember a wild party the day after the collector base mission. After that, you and the others still have an appetite for killing your brain cells with liquor. Roger let out a laugh. Between you and me, I can't drink as much as I used to. He flexed his mechanical arm. Funny thing about cybernetic limbs. There's a lot of body mass that they replace, and with less body mass, the booze can't diffuse as much as it used to. So I get drunk a lot faster than I used to when I had 10 toes and 10 fingers. He smirked. And yet I still can easily drink Cheryl under the table. But anyway, end point is that I'll be going there for the atmosphere more than anything else. Good music, general friendly attitude, the two I really care about, and a good friend if she's up for it. Ashley would never admit it, even if there was a shotgun pressed against her head by an angry Krogan, but she was touched by Roger referring to her as his friend. It felt like a stupid thing to be affected by, after all, the baggage between them had been dealt with a long time ago, but it was still a pleasant surprise. Even if, the more she thought about it, it wasn't that surprising. It was more a welcome distraction from the fragile nature of the peace that hung in the balance. Lead the way, she said. Dark Star, hey. Rex said, working his way to the head of the throng. More of a Kara's Den guy myself. They always give me discounts there, and I could probably get some for the rest of you. He gave a small shrug. Then again, half of you might take issue with the fact that I get discounts because the owner thinks I'll trash the place if I don't get 30% off. And would you? Nora asked, sounding as if she wasn't sure whether to laugh or be angry. Nope, Rex said, a massive shit-eating grin spreading across his face. But I never told him that. He just assumed that I would and I was in no hurry to correct him. Hey, if he wants to assume the big ugly Krogan is a violent thug, that's on him, not me. Nora's eyes had been narrowed up until this point, but they loosened as she let out a hearty laugh. Well, humans, standard, necro, and meta, don't come to the Citadel that often. The whole I hate you, you hate me, but we're gonna pretend otherwise until we start shooting each other deal you had with the council probably made it awkward. So I'm gonna guess you don't know where the lounge is. So follow me if you are tired of being sober. With Rex in the lead, the group departed from the dock and made their way through the citadel. As they moved towards the lower levels, Ashley couldn't help but notice more than a few disapproving looks being thrown their way by the various aliens that lived on the citadel. She supposed that it was only natural, considering that they had been at war with them not too long ago, but it still made moving through the citadel feel uncomfortable. More uncomfortable than it usually did anyway. Eventually, they found themselves outside the Dark Star Lounge. At least Ashley assumed it was the Dark Star Lounge. There wasn't a visible name. Filing in through the entranceway, they made their way to the bar and managed to take up a good portion of it all by themselves. The Turian behind it looked a little startled at the massive influx of customers but kept his cool. Coalition? Hey, fine by me so long as your money's good, but I can't have you guys causing trouble in here, alright? CSEC has been up my rear all day and I don't need another reason to come back here. So what can I get you? Ashley barely listened as the requests for drinks were listed off, mere asking for some water herself. The amount of alcohol consumption had reached such an insane level since the collector base, that she just couldn't help but feel oversaturated by the prospect of it. Too much of it had happened for her taste. So instead, she looked around. A loud but pleasant beat was playing over the lounge's speakers and a dance floor was illuminated with bright, multicolored lights. Despite this, very few people were dancing. In fact, the lounge looked like it had practically been deserted before the Normandy crew members had arrived. Getting up, Ashley returned to the entrance and took a quick peek outside. Now that she thought about it, the overall foot traffic on the Citadel looked a little lighter than the last time she had seen it all those months ago. It was a small sample size, but it made her feel uncomfortable all the same. She returned to the bar, just in time to see drinks being handed out to the group, many of whom left the bar after being served to locate more private tables. Nora, Cheryl, and Roger took one for themselves, Jessica joining them after a decent bit of coaxing. The former Enclave Special Forces operative sat opposite her former foes, looking both uncertain and pleased. Roger activated her Omni tool and showed something to her, while Cheryl let out a loud yawn after a few sips of her drink and leaned to her side, resting her head on Nora's shoulder. Smiling, the larger woman took off her hat and plucked it onto the top of Cheryl, who didn't seem to mind at all. Adam and Cornelia had taken a table to themselves. To her surprise, they had both activated their Omni tools and now holograms of some sort of card game were coating the table. It was no game that Ashley recognized, although it clearly wasn't a standard 52-card deck game. Odd-looking figures were coming out of the cards after they were played, clashing against each other with brutal and obviously fake viciousness. She could see Cornelia playing a game like that, but was surprised that Adam was into that sort of thing. It didn't match the kind of quiet, caring dignity that came with being a priest. Then again, neither did chugging Nuka-Cola. She watched the game for a little bit, trying to follow it without knowing the rules. Cornelia seemed to be trying to flood the board with large numbers of weak creatures in an attempt to overwhelm Adam, while Adam seemed to be trying to build up a steady front line of much stronger creatures. Both of them seemed to be losing a large number of cards each, but Cornelia had a grin on her face while Adam looked worried. That was probably a safe bet that he was losing. So, tell me, what's the plan for the Krogan people after this? Ashley turned her head. Rex was standing with Gurus and Lyra nearby, Rex holding 2 glasses of what looked like ring coal. What exactly are you going to be demanding from the council? Gurus asked. Interested, Ashley moved towards the 3 of them. Not gonna lie, that's something I never worked on the details of until recently, Rex said. Up until recently, the end goals for the Krogan were just getting around the genophage. Get enough fertile females to get around the genophage, hate the council because of the genophage, and I was always arguing that we had to stop fighting each other because of the genophage. He drained one of the glasses. You probably got a good impression from Reeve, but a lot of Krogan didn't even want to listen to that. He drained the other glass. But as for what comes after, it's hard to figure out. Nearly all Krogan just came to accept the genophage as something that they were going to have to live with, no matter how much they hated it. This is something you need to understand. If you were a Krogan born between this whole mess and the Krogan rebellions, the genophage was part of your life, and a massive part of your identity as a Krogan. Rex slid the glasses onto a countertop as he continued talking, the bartender giving him a refill. I've seen so many young Krogan just not giving a damn about throwing their lives away on stupid clan feuds or mercenary work. I talked to a lot of them back when I lived on the home world, trying to bring them into clan Erdnot, get them to work towards something better. You know what they said? Every single time? What's the point, we're all going to be extinct in a couple thousand years anyway. Rex sighed. As he sighed, for the first time, Ashley truly appreciated the fact that Rex was well over 1,000 years old. For my people, there was no after the genophage. We dreamed about it, but we never thought that it was actually going to happen. Now it's happened, and I need to give my people a future, while also making sure we don't end up right back where we started. I hate to be the one to say this, Gurus said, but you're going to have to find a way to make sure you don't piss off the council again. If you take the same old expansion routes that you did before the Krogan rebellions, the council is going to mobilize and I'm not certain the coalition will risk going to war a second time over this. I know, I've been thinking about that, Rex said. We're gonna need to put in some kind of breeding law. Though I was probably gonna have to do that anyway. The genophage gets cured, we go right back to screwing to make kids in the old numbers, and the hierarchy almost beats us within a month by starving us to death. We don't have the infrastructure for the old kind of breeding, and probably won't for decades. Though you're wrong on one point, Gurus. I won't be dealing with the council. Gurus blinked. What? He'll just be dealing with the Turian hierarchy, Lyra added in. Though they may receive some support from the Union. This war has changed the council. The council couldn't stand united in their decision of how they wanted to approach the coalition, the Asari republics didn't stand by the Union and the hierarchy when they needed them. And now that everyone knows what the Reapers and Collectors are, there's an uproar from nearly all species that the republics were in the right to not take a side. She gave a weary sigh. And just as many for saying that they were just in the wrong because they stayed neutral and didn't stand against Saren. I hate to say it, but in a conflict, both sides tend to have a dim view of those who don't side with them, Gurus said. They view them as looking out for their own self-interest and not working towards the greater good. Pretty roundabout way of saying that people think they're cowards, but basically, Rex said. Speaking of which, the next round of meetings starts in half an hour, so I'll have to leave to make it up to that. This'll be real fun. Half of the words out of the council always start with "this has always been the case" or "this has never been the case" when I bring up proposals. They just don't seem to get it. This war was pretty small compared to the Rachni Wars and Krogan rebellions, the council can't just go back to being the council after all of this. Ashley chose now to enter the conversation. Do you think the council's going to end up being dissolved? She asked. She couldn't help but remember how the United Nations had dissolved back on pre-war Earth as a prelude to the Great War. She wasn't overly fond of the council, but she very much wanted to avoid that scenario happening all over again. Nah, they've been doing this for 3,000 years, that's too much to just drop everything, Rex said. It's just that what the council says is going to end up mattering less and less. Representatives that have an issue with laws aren't going to go to them, they'll just bypass them and go straight to the heads of state of their governments. The council will get some bones thrown at them, but them being the be-all and all? That's over. Maybe for good. So where do we go from here then? Ashley asked. Does the coalition have to sign separate peace and trade treaties for each member of the council? We had a rather blanket treaty after the First Contact War, does that even apply anymore? Rex shrugged. Couldn't tell you. Still, I'll give you credit. The coalition did in a few months what the Krogan couldn't do in 3 centuries. You completely turned the council on its head. Ashley lowered her head, taking a small sip of her water. She had not wanted this to happen. She had had no desire to fracture galactic politics like this. The only thing she had wanted to do was protect the coalition and their way of life. A joke, Williams, Rex said. Trust me. When you're in a shit situation, sometimes you gotta learn to laugh at things. I've made more than one joke about how I've got 4 balls and none of them worked properly every time I tried my luck at having a kid. Despite the unpleasant mental image that gave her, Ashley couldn't help but let out a small snort of laughter. It didn't do a whole lot to remove the overwhelming feeling that was slowly starting to creep over her. The feeling that something was broken. She was grimly awaiting the punishment that would follow. Before the conversation could continue, Rex's Omni tool gave a loud beep. Well, crap, they want to start early today, he said, checking it. Guess they want to get things rolling now that President Woods is here in person and not communicating via hologram. He paused, reading the message that had been sent to him in detail. He blinked. Shit, he said. They want Shepard to be part of today's meetings. A heavy silence fell over the 4 of them. Why? Gurus asked tersely. Ashley was pretty sure Gurus, Lyra, and herself all knew the reason, but none of them wanted to say it out loud in the vain hope that they were wrong. Rex disappointed them. It looks like, as part of the peace agreement we've been spending all of our meetings making barely any progress on, they want her brought up on war crimes, he said. Yesterday we finally managed to get the council to agree to not press charges on anyone for curing the genophage, though probably only because we're part of proceedings and they can't just ignore us anymore, but it looks like they're coming at this from the Rachni angle. We were all there, Lyra said sharply. We were all part of Shepard's crew when that decision happened. If she's going to be brought up on charges, then they can do it to all of us. Or are they too afraid to hurt their already fragile image to say that one of Thesha's most respected matriarchs, and her daughter, were involved? Probably, Rex said. Anderson and Hackett sent me this message, that seems to be the general impression that they got from. Oh, and they also said that they would really appreciate it if I didn't make too much of a stink about this and that they would try and make sure that Shepard isn't charged, though they may have to discipline her on their end to make the council happy. So in other words, they're telling me to shut up and be a good little boy. He sighed. I was starting to like the coalition's leadership. I guess I should keep all my love for Marcus, the only major military leader in the galaxy more infertile than I am. Ashley didn't laugh this time. You will help her, won't you? Lyra asked, sounding more than a little nervous. Rex looked honestly offended at the question. I think I can be bothered to help the sister of the man who died helping cure my species of the biological that had been driving them down a slow path to extinction. Doubly so considering it was her idea in the first place. Lyra gave an apologetic nod, but Rex waved it off, evidently able to figure out what she was about to say. Don't apologize, we've got bigger stuff to worry about. I'll do what I can on my end, you may want to get in contact with your mother and see if she can pull any strings from your end. Lyra activated her own Omni tool, looking a little worried. I'll try, but something odd has been happening. My mother hasn't been responding to any of my messages. It's not just me either, I've asked a few of her old friends, and they haven't heard anything from her either. It's been like this for over a month now. She swallowed. You don't think something happened to her, do you? No, Gurus said without hesitation. The only one who would be stupid enough to try and hurt your mother is Saren. And if Saren had done anything to bring harm to an Asari matriarch as known and respected as your mother, the Republics would have fought alongside the coalition without question. If I had to guess, your mother was most likely busy dealing with the war. I hope so, Lyra said, typing into her Omni tool. I'll send a message asking for help just to be on the safe side. Hopefully, she'll be able to pull through with help for Shepard on this one. They were both the ones who decided to let the Queen go after all. Let me know if anything comes up, Rex said, sounding annoyed. In the meantime, I have to go make sure your people don't throw her to a pack of hungry Varen. With a grunt, Rex made for the exit. Ashley watched him go, badly wishing she could follow him. Anderson and Hackett had said that they had only been interested in making sure that Jane was still fit for duty. She wanted to believe that they wouldn't offer her up to appease the council, but if the alternative was the war flaring up again, would they stand by her? Ashley tried hard to not think of the answer to that question. XXXXX. Shepard was in a strange place of limbo. She heard everything that the representatives at what was hesitantly being called a peace summit were saying, but her thought process went no deeper than that. She heard it and remembered all of it, but did not analyze it at all. The end result was her taking more and more mental notes of a series of conflicting accusations, interests, and agendas, without bothering to consider what they all meant. It wasn't meaningless noise to her, but it was noise that she was making no effort to find the meaning of. She took a look around, taking in everyone who was present on the Presidium. Admirals Anderson and Hackett, the Council, President Woods, General Moore, Dalatras Linran, Primarch Fedorian, Admiral Shailaran, Legion, Rex, who had just walked in a few minutes ago, General Vitas, a representative from the Batarian hegemony whose name Shepard didn't know, and several Asari matriarchs. In between all of them were dozens upon dozens, maybe even hundreds, of soldiers from the representative governments of the representatives. Shepard didn't recognize most of them, but she did spot Cadence Moore near her mother at the head of a group of Enclave soldiers in power armor, her super sledge on her back. They weren't in the chamber in which the council met, it was far too small for this. Instead, a conference room had been reserved for them, a wide, open room with circular tables and observation seats that could seat hundreds. Most of them were empty, minus a few VIPs that had been given permission to be there. Regnam, despite everything, is a citizen of the hegemony. The Batarian representative made, although he didn't look as confident as he was trying to sound. The crimes that she committed were against the Batarian people, within the territory of the hegemony. It is our right to judge her as one of our own, without outside interference. Jane shook her head. She had heard about the glassing Regnam had ordered, and something about the severity of that crime caused her mind to slowly slog forward. Subconsciously, she began to follow the beats of the arguments and debates again, though not as fast as she normally did. The first thing she noticed was that nearly every government representative was glaring at the Batarian. The only exceptions were Legion, who Shepard wasn't certain was emotionally capable of glaring, and Linran, who looked more annoyed than angry. Ignoring how no galactic power would ever allow such an atrocity to go unpunished, Hackett said coldly, Batarian civilians were not the only target. Hundreds of thousands of Marina shock troopers and mercenaries in the employment of the coalition were on Tylev. It was an act performed against an enemy you were at war with, and I do believe that qualifies as a war crime, am I correct? I can think of approximately 12 treaties that the Batarian hegemony signed in which they agreed to the classification of orbital bombardment as a war crime, Sparatus said. All of them classified the targeting of civilian centers during an armed conflict as a war crime as well, none of them clarifying that there was an exception to friendly ones. Sparatus clicked his talons against the table in frustration and obvious dislike. Shepard had to admit, it felt odd seeing him being angry with someone who wasn't a member of the coalition for a change. If the situation was just a little bit different, she might have enjoyed the experience. Precisely, Anderson said. And as Regnum was the one who ordered the largest mass slaughter of civilians this century, we, as representatives of the galactic community as a whole, demand the right to see her punished for her crimes. A right we fully intend to pursue. He looked around at the other representatives. Unless there are any objections. Nearly all of them shook their heads, even Woods and Moore joining in with disgust on their face. Legion didn't nod, instead gently moving its head back and forth as it observed the talks, and Linren, who simply chose not to respond and seemed to have become suddenly fascinated with her Omni-tool. Shepard could help but feel that she looked thoroughly apathetic from this distance. I will have to confirm this with the provisional government, the Batarian said, wiping sweat from his brow. But, if we are putting my former head of government on trial for her crimes, then surely we should be putting all who have committed crimes against the galaxy on trial, shouldn't we? A heavy silence fell into the room. Quite a few of the onlookers glared at the Batarian even more heavily, while some heads turned in Jane's direction. I'm just saying, we still don't know where the Rachni are and. You'll forgive me if this sounds like a naked attempt to change the subject to make yourself look good by comparison, Woods said scathingly. Your chancellor was the one that gave an order to have millions of living, thinking lives out of existence because of spite. Kind of seems like you're in a hurry to make everyone forget about that. And if we're discussing the matter of war crimes, I feel that there are a few more important matters that need to be cleared up beforehand, Moore said, turning her head away from the Batarian and onto Linren. As if she could sense the general's glare, Linren looked up, waiting patiently. Are you in possession of any enclave prisoners of war? Linren nodded. Thousands of them, all of whom are being kept comfortable and cared for, she said, her voice controlled and neutral. If you wish to discuss the exchange of POWs, I believe that can be easily arranged, particularly with the Turian prisoners Hes from the Battle of Tuchanka. I am not certain what you are attempting to imply with frivolous accusations of war crimes. Are you suggesting that we have been mistreating the personnel that we have taken captive? No, Moore said, her hands tightening into fists as she spoke, looking as if she wanted to do nothing more than vault over the tables and skewer Linren with her sword. I'm just wondering exactly how many prisoners there are. See, that invasion force you smashed was massive, both ground and space-based, and we have hundreds of thousands of men and women unaccounted for. We have good guesses on who died and who survived the naval engagement, but things are still fuzzy with the ground battle. I was on the surface of Surkesh, I saw what happened down there. Tell me. Do Yog even understand the concept of taking prisoners? My experience with them was brief, but they struck me as the type that don't. I mean, the council quarantined them for a reason. A quarantine that I think we all agree should be re-established as soon as possible, Woods said. Unless the entire species has been uplifted as a response to the war between us. Has it? Even through the haze that was clouding her mind, Shepard felt a small pang of panic. She could see half of the occupants of the room react in similar manners, stiffening, recoiling, and looking concerned as their attention turned to Linren. No, Linren said. The 100,000 Yog that were recruited to serve in the war are the only Yog that have been allowed off-planet since their homeworld was quarantined. The Solarian Union reached out to the Yog and permitted some of their warriors the chance to leave their planet in exchange for serving the Union. In exchange, they were promised that the Union would speak to the Council on their behalf, asking them to re-examine the quarantine and consider lifting it. That was well beyond your authority. Sparatus shouted, sounding utterly livid. The Yog quarantine was put in place by the Council. One species can't simply subvert the authority of the Council when it represents the interests of all of its member and non-member species. I understand this, Linren said, and I submit my wrongdoings to the Council, for them to prosecute with the full extent of their authority. Jane's eyes narrowed. There was something rather nasty and smug about the way Linren had just said that. As if she thought she had some kind of trump card to assure that nothing would come of any attempts to incriminate her. And, unless she was mistaken, Primarch Fedorian looked rather dejected as he watched this conversation play out. I think a disarmament of this Yog army and a return of all survivors to their homeworld should be the first step taken here, Tavos said, her voice gentle, but with a trace of frustration to it. You promised the Yog that you would bring the matter of removing the quarantine to us and ask us to consider it. We will do just that. She looked back and forth between her fellow councillors, both of whom shook their heads. We have considered it. The quarantine will stand. If anything, the Battle of Surkesh has proven how wise the councillors who ordered the quarantine put in place were. Of course, I utterly agree with you, Linren said, blatantly being disingenuous. The disarmament of the Yog army is already underway, and 5,000 of them are already on shuttles and cargo ships heading for their home world. I will pass along your message to them. She gave a quick nod of the head, just brisk and short enough to not be polite at all. Now then, I do think we should discuss the matter of the Rachni. They're still loose in the galaxy and have not been spotted for months. You still didn't answer my question, Moore asked. Over half of my task force got left behind on Surkesh. Less than 40% of it got evacuated. Quarians were down there too, even if it wasn't a lot of them. So please tell me. Are any of them still alive? Are there any that you took as prisoners? Or did the Yogg just gun down anyone and everyone that they say? Moore's voice was deadly quiet. One of our generals was down there. General Gall. I know for a fact that they killed her, even though she was in no shape to fight back. Shepard felt like someone had just punched her in the gut. She blinked, looking at Moore. That couldn't be right. Sam was dead? Moore didn't notice her looking. Cadence, however, did. The power armor-clad woman glanced at Shepard and gave a small nod. Cadence wasn't wearing her helmet and, unless Shepard was mistaken, she could see tears sparkling in her eyes. The haze slowly began to creep back over Shepard, but the horrible, twisted wrongness that had come with learning about Sam's death continued to eat away at her gut. Linren gave an arrogant smirk. I can assure you that no surrenders were offered. It seemed, no doubt a part of the rigid training you put your men through, that they all chose to fight to the last man. To imply otherwise would be a rather serious accusation, one that I do hope that you don't intend to make without proof. Of course not, Moore said, folding her arms. Which is why I have to ask that you hand over all bodies and war equipment of the fallen. We had plenty of soldiers with recording equipment on them, at least one squad member has a helmet for gathering intelligence. A quick look at them would be enough to tell us all what happened. Her voice dropped so low it was almost a snarl. And it'd be rather telling if the recording equipment was all destroyed or tampered with. But since you're so innocent, you wouldn't mind handing it all over, would you? I agree with General Moore, Woods said, staring at Linren. She was more composed than Moore, but Shepard could still see icy cold hatred in the older woman's eyes. Linren's smirk faltered but quickly returned. Shepard couldn't tell if it was genuine or if the Solarian was putting up an act. Of course. The war is over now. We need to focus on building bridges. And as a measure of good faith, all Enclave prisoners of war will be returned to you. Enquarian ones. Shailaran added. She had mostly been quiet up until this point, no doubt a result of the fact that the Quarians had easily the least political clout out of all those gathered, but her voice was firm. Dozens of Quarian vessels were lost in the orbital battle of Surkesh. Have they been treated well? Even with the modified FEV that cured our immune system, barely any of us have gone through the physical therapy required to live outside our suits normally. It would be highly easy to abuse Quarian prisoners of war, simply raising or lowering the temperature and forcing them out of their suits would be enough. I wouldn't worry, Woods said, her voice almost casual, but still as hard and cold as steel. Dalatras Linren is a wise and kind leader. Of course she's been treating your men with respect and of course, she was going to be returning your sailors with mine. She gave a small smile at Linren. Shepard knew the smile. It was the kind of smile you wore when you had to pretend to like someone while also implying that you'd much rather be bashing their skull in with a short bit of pipe. Isn't that right, Dalatras? Again, Linren's smirk flickered. Of course. And I assure you, they have been very well cared for. We will have them heading back towards Rannoch within a week. Transport will be provided. I'll even permit them to keep some second-hand shuttles, I'm well aware of how invaluable they are to your people. Shepard was 99% sure that that last line had been intended as an insult towards the Quarians. Judging by the way Shailaran tensed up in response, it had worked. Clearing his throat to prevent matters from devolving into mudslinging, Hackett spoke. Then, in order to match the Solarian Union's selfless generosity, we will also ensure that all Turian POWs are returned to hierarchy space within 2 weeks. I'll send word to begin preparations. The Turian councillor gave a nod of respect towards Hackett. Thank you, Admiral. If you could please do me a small favor, I'd like a list of those who survived the battle. I'm certain their families would like to know that their mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, and sons and daughters are coming home. Hackett nodded, but before he could say anything else, Primarch Fedorian spoke up. I deeply appreciate the gesture, Admiral, and I don't wish to come off as ungrateful, but I must ask that you return all Turians from Tuchanka, not just the POWs. Primarch Fedorian's words sunk in as silence crept into the room again. A few heads turned to look at General Vitas. All surviving members of General Vitas' force must return to hierarchy space and face judgment for their actions. For desertion, I imagine? Hackett asked. Fedorian nodded grimly. He didn't seem to be taking any pleasure in this, but there was a rock-solid determination in his eyes. Jane had a bad feeling that, no matter what, he wasn't going to be backing down on this front. Fedorian nodded. I understand your claim, but currently those soldiers are under the protection of the coalition and its allies. I can't just ask them to turn themselves in after everything they've done for us. You don't have to, Vitas said. He had been sitting with the coalition representatives, but now he stood to his feet. Primarch? I will return to the hierarchy to face judgment under one condition. Pardon my men. They were doing their duty as soldiers of the hierarchy, to follow the orders of their superior and never break the chain of command. They never broke the chain. I did. Do not punish them for doing what every citizen in the hierarchy has been trained from their teenage years to do. Fedorian paused, looking directly at Vitas. Quite a bit of talking had broken out between the other representatives, but Jane ignored it, focusing purely on the two Turians. You know how the hierarchy works, an example needs to be made, he said. If the security of our people is put at risk by the actions of one of own, then that person is no longer fit to be a servant of the hierarchy. I agree, Vitas said. Which is why I should be the target of the hierarchy's judgment and I alone. The duty of a soldier is to follow the order of his superiors and lead his subordinates in the right direction in accordance with the will of their superiors. None of my men broke either of these procedures. I broke both. If you must, punish me for the actions of my mine. They deserve better. There was a long, pregnant pause from Fedorian. You are certain on this stance? Vitas nodded. Very well then. As Primarch of the Turian hierarchy, I strip you of your rank, and dishonorable discharge you from the hierarchy's armed forces. I also sentence you to exile for the rest of your life. You will have a month to put your affairs in order before this exile begin. He blinked. Jane couldn't help but notice that he didn't look happy about any of this. You are aware where you will be expected to go for your exile. I am, Vitas said, giving a nod so small it was barely noticeable. His voice sounded strained. I will need transportation there. I also have several recommendations for my replacement. Quite a few talented commanders have, I believe, what it takes to be a general of the hierarchy. I see. I will be certain to look at them after this meeting is done. Fedorian paused, looking as though he was lost for a second, but recovered quickly. Shepard wondered if Fedorian would be doing this if the strict nature of Turian society didn't demand otherwise. You will return to Turian space as soon as possible, handing over control of your flagship to your XO when you do. After that, all access to classified information will be revoked, and you will be required to turn over all military hardware and software in your possessions. Do you understand? Yes, Primarch, Vitas said, taking his seat and looking down at the table, saying nothing more. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Well, now that that matter is settled, Linren said, and even through the dull haze hanging over her, Shepard felt a spike of anger, we really should move on to the next matter on the agenda. The Rachni simply need to be addressed, if I can do this without being interrupted. Unless there is anything else that we feel should be discussed before. More than a few dirty looks were thrown at Linren, one from Primarch Fedorian, but no one objected to the change of topic. A creeping feeling of resignation began to spread through Shepard. She had known that this would happen. Thank you. Now, I do believe we all know our history of the Rachni Wars, even if many of the species here had not risen up to the stars when it happened, so some of us may not fully be able to grasp the horrors of it. Some of us may also not be able to grasp the horrors of it because they had to get another species to fight for them in the war they started, Rex dryly. It's a complicated war after all. For the first time during that meeting, Linren's calm and smug demeanor vanished, and pure hatred flooded in. She looked as if she was going to start screaming at Rex, but instead, she closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. As I was saying, she said, acting as if Rex had not interrupted her, it was a tragedy the likes of which would only be repeated once in the next 2,000 years. Jane wondered if that was an insult directed at the Krogan. Rex snarled in response to the statement, so whether it had been intended as such or not, Rex seemed to be taking it that way. But, sadly, it seems that the galaxy is doomed to relieve it yet again, as they have been unleashed, and we have no way in which to track them. I trust you have been reading our reports on the Reapers. Hackett asked. We were quite detailed on their capabilities, but one thing in particular stood out to us. The ability known as indoctrination, a signal that works its way into the mind of an organic being and slowly gains control of it. His eyes narrowed. You are familiar with what I'm talking about, correct? Linren nodded curtly. Then I hope you understand that the accusation of Rachni being a threat to the galaxy doesn't carry the same weight that it used to. The Rachni queen that was released claimed that her children had been corrupted by, and I quote, a sour yellow note. Given the time frame, it's all too possible that a Reaper near their planet indoctrinated the Rachni. We have records that suggest that even dead and damaged Reapers are capable of this. Saren experienced something similar during his excavations. Exactly, Rex said. When we first met the Queen, I was all for smashing her head with a rock and then taking a flamethrower to her eggs. Just like my grandfather used to talk about, honoring old Krogan traditions, you know? But we had a matriarch look inside her head, and unless you're saying that a half-starved and weak Rachni Queen has some sort of trick that can beat them poking around your head, well, we had 300 years of trying to figure one out and we couldn't come up with anything. He activated his Omni tool. I'm not exaggerating. Asari extracting intelligence from Krogan POWs was a big concern during the rebellions. I've got a few records covering it if you need some proof. Asari historians too, so don't waste my time whining about bias. While I fully admit that conventional technology has proven to be incapable of stopping powerful matriarchs from gathering intelligence, All records we have on this matter are on council races, Linren replied, her smarminess starting to flow back into her voice. In the centuries during which we fought the Arachne War, a queen was never taken alive. The act of sending a force out to the depths of Arachne-controlled world and extracting one was simply impossible. We only know what we do from autopsies, and Arachne queens were so durable that even Krogan had to make copious use of heavy firepower to bring them down. The corpses we were able to recover were in very bad shape. Simply put, we don't know what happens when an Asari mend melds with the Arachne hive mind. She continued. As she did, her gaze shifted away from Rex and onto Shepard. Shepard met her stare without blinking but didn't respond beyond that. And while it is a massive relief that there is a strong possibility that the Arachne attacked because of reasons beyond their control, we only learned this recently. Back when they were released, we had every reason to believe that they were inherently aggressive and expansionist, attacking all other species on sight and overrunning their territory. The act of releasing Arachne Queen during that time was nothing short of reckless and dangerous. And those responsible should be held accountable. Linren didn't say Shepard's name. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room was looking directly at her. All of those responsible? So you're saying that you want to put Matriarch Benezia on trial? Anderson asked. Is the Asari Republics willing to take part in that? Because allow me to make one thing perfectly clear. No soldier or sailor within the coalition is going to be put on trial for a farce of justice. Matriarch Benezia had just as much responsibility in the Arachne being released, and far more authority. Captain Shepard has been called to this meeting, doubtless with the intention of having her convicted for the act of sparing the Arachne, but I don't see Benezia anywhere. Unless you are making a strong case to put her on trial too, the coalition will not even consider charging Captain Jane Shepard with anything outside of what the coalition deems fit. And at the moment, we see fit to charge her with nothing. This is a decision that we, as a nation, have reached, Hackett said sternly. To charge Shepard and not Benezia would be an unacceptable double standard. Shepard felt a small prick of appreciation in her stomach, one that almost shone through the shroud that was covering her. She couldn't help but notice, however, that Linren's gaze had not moved from her. I understand your frustration, but there is something you must consider, Linren said. Activating her Omni tool, she pressed a few buttons, tapping into the holographic projectors located between the tables and causing several news feeds to appear floating in the air. You doubtless missed them since you only came in through areas that had been labeled high security by CSEC, but all is not well on the Citadel. The feeds flickered to life, and Shepard's stomach seized. Several riots were in progress, with CSEC operatives in full riot gear doing what they could to suppress them, even firing concussive rounds on full auto, with mixed results. In some cases, the mobs of angry people, all of them aliens, were lashing out directly at the CSEC operatives. In many other cases, they were smashing the windows of shops, overturning stands, and engaged in general looting, assaulting citizens that were either vulnerable or didn't get out of the way fast enough. The ones that truly caught Jane's attention, however, and doubtless the ones that Linren had meant for her to see, were the ones that had coalition citizens in them. Despite the Citadel being a hub of galactic politics, it played home to very few from the coalition, who had a tendency to stay within their home territory. The ones that did come to live on the Citadel commonly had careers that required them to work with aliens, or simply had nothing to lose and wanted to be far away from the coalition. They were the bridge builders, the outreachers, and the desperate. And now, they were targets. The corpse of one necro-human was hanging lifelessly from the sign of a shop, a noose around her neck as the crowd below her cheered, 5 outnumbered CSEC officers viciously battling to get to the middle of the throng. A meta-human was being accosted by a pair of Elcor, who, despite his best efforts to fight them off, had broken both of his legs and were now raining blows down upon his prone body. A trio of standard humans had fled into a gun shop and were now trading fire with a group of mercenaries on the far side of the shopping center they were on. And one had truly massive mob gathered around a prone standard human, beating him to death. Many of the aliens in that feed had signs they were holding, screaming to someone Jane couldn't see. Signs with her face on it, and letters in alien languages that, while she couldn't read, she doubted said anything nice. These kinds of posters and pictures were all over every last one of the feeds. There has been a recent spike in anti-coalition sentiments as a result of this war, Linren said. Even though it has only been a little over a month, it has brought tensions that have existed since we first met to a boiling point. While our armies may no longer clash, we have to consider a possibility going forward. Civil violence between civilians, the formation of armed militias with aggressive agendas, possibly even full-blown terrorist cells. First non-coalition attacking coalition, then the reverse, and then everything spiraling out of control. Within a decade of a hollow peace like this, the death toll may outnumber the one created by the war. I want nothing more than a true peace, not a mere absence of military actions, Linren said, raising her hands up. You want Shepard to be offered up, Woods said bluntly. Make a spectacle out of here so that everyone calms down. Bit of a flaw in your plan though, the coalition people will see it as their government caving to aliens and be furious. It might calm down the council races, but not the coalition itself. I might even go so far to say that the enclave itself would be quite mad, and considering that Shepard and her crew have gone quite a few favors for the Krogan and Quarian people, this would provoke quite a bit of anger from them too. Indeed it would, Shailaran said. I have to agree with Admiral Anderson. If you cared about anything resembling justice, you'd be calling for both Captain Shepard and Matriarch Benezia to be put on trial. But we aren't going to be seeing that, are we? Rex said, sounding genuinely angry. He glared at Councillor Tavos and the present matriarchs. Why is that exactly? Tavos cleared her throat. We are actually not opposed to summoning Matriarch Benezia and have her face the consequences of her overstepping her authority. However, ever since the start of the war, she has been missing. No communications to or from her have been found. Even her former bondmate is unaware of her location and has not received word from here. Rest assured, if it will address your concerns, we are looking for her. Tavos' words seemed to do the opposite of ease concerns. If anything, the coalition, enclave, Krogan and Quarian representatives looked insulted. Oh, missing? Well, that's convenient, Rex said. And I guess we're just supposed to assume that you're giving it your all? You haven't been doing it all half-heartedly and then giving up, have you? You're not just lying to us right now? Or maybe missing is just a private euphemism for she's missing because no one found the body we tossed out the airlock yet. Either way, it still sounds like this one wants to string Shepard up without waiting, and in a trial she'd probably stack in her favor. Arrangements can be made for the locating of Matriarch Benezia, Linren said. STG can assist Spectres in hunting her down as a fugitive of the law if the Republics agree to it. As for the implication that I would stack a trial, I am highly affronted. Affronted that I think you would do that, or affronted that you're not nearly as subtle and clever as you think you are, Rex asked darkly. I mean really, the Republics just lose one of their biggest matriarchs? They think we're dumb enough to fall for that. 6 months ago you didn't know your own brother was building an army to attack the coalition and rebel against the council. One of the matriarchs shouted angrily. You of all people have no right to make accusations about intelligence failures. Particularly when you fancy yourself a head of state. Shepard's mind went blank. She had not expected this. She had expected to have to face some consequences for her actions, but she had always thought that they would be a punishment exclusive to her and her alone. She wasn't looking forward to it, part of her dreaded it, but she was willing to accept it. Except that wasn't what was happening at all. The council couldn't let her go without angering its own civilians and leading the deaths of who knows how many coalition citizens. The coalition couldn't give her up without doing the exact inverse happening. And right now, people were rioting in the Citadel, most likely rioting all over council space, because of what she had done. People were dying because of her. She saw it again. The image of the hung necro-human. And it set off a chain reaction. She remembered Jenkins, killed on Moria by a Batarian sneak attack. She remembered Philo, assassinated after letting herself be manipulated as a political pawn just so she could be helpful to her planet. She remembered Sam, who would put herself on the line to protect others, and had been killed by Yogg on the Solarian homeworld. She remembered her brother, who had sacrificed himself to save coalition lives. I'm going to make this right, she whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear over the noise of the arguments that were now escalating to shouting. I'm going to make this right. 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 XXXXX. Hurst turned over the cigar in his hand, threading it through his fingers before turning it over again. Either light it or put it away for the love of God, a very annoyed Rigg said. Hurst chuckled. He and Rigg were sitting on Sarah's bridge, the screens showing camera feeds of the Citadel dock they were currently resting in. The majority of the refugees he had rescued had been content to let off on ADEK, a handful had refused. They had not wanted to be left on a planet that was ruled by those who had been members of the old regime. That was what Hurst assumed anyway, they had refused to actually tell him. He, along with the rest of the nomads who had taken part in the Battle of Tylev, had made their way to the Citadel, where the refugees would disembark. One of the first things that the coalition had managed to earn in their talks with the council was asylum in council space for these refugees, along with Batarians who were now actively fleeing the hegemony. Of the latter, there were proving to be a surprisingly large amount, with commandeered cargo vessels, yachts, and transport liners jumping from hegemony to council space, at least a dozen a day. Hurst couldn't help but notice that, while some of them were stopping at ADEK to be with their own kind, many of them were bypassing the SDA, taking the longer and harder trip to the Citadel and other strongholds of the council. Even after her death, General Hill's missteps at ADEK tainted whatever potential the planet had had as a birthplace of a new Batarian society. The way things were looking now, ADEK would most likely become a minor, unimportant player on the galactic scale, the only difference between it and an independent colony in the Terminus systems being that it was backed by the coalition and had a formal, trained army. Hurst noticed that no one wanted to talk about it very much, but with General Yusuro in charge and still going by the moniker of General, it was also most likely going to end up a military dictatorship or a stratocracy. Hardly a place where any major progress or reform happened, even with a benevolent dictator. And after Yusuro had responded to Fallot's assassination with public executions, Hurst wasn't sure she could be called benevolent. In a way, ADEK's bad image was probably good for the refugees individually, although not so great for the Batarian species as a whole. As selfish as Hill's intentions had been with the formation of the sovereign dominion of ADEK, there had been potential for it to grow into something great, a place where the Batarian people could be free and happy. Or maybe that's just me being naive, Hurst muttered to himself. Either way, it was now clear to everyone who was paying attention that the SDA wasn't a bright future for the Batarian people, and from certain perspectives, it just looked like more of what they had come to expect from the hegemony, minus the slavery and infrastructure. As such, many were avoiding it and heading to a place where they would be able to experience freedoms that they had only ever heard about before, but any talents they had would be drained out of Batarian space as a result. Hurst had a gut feeling that the hegemony would be seeing a massive slump in the next few years, not just from losing 2 planets and going through a governmental shift, but through a refugee crisis and the very real possibility of brain drain if more educated citizens made up a good portion of those fleeing. Then there's the Council's end of things, he said. The Council was a massive collection of worlds with resources and influence that could easily handle Batarian refugees, even if tens or even hundreds of millions of them came pouring out of hegemony space. Thankfully it was nowhere near that bad yet, the refugees currently numbering in the tens of thousands, but Hurst a bad feeling about the culture clash that might occur between the refugees and the Council species. The coalition had been the first government to not join the Council, and that had led to decades of tension that had helped contribute to a galactic war. The Batarians were the second species to withdraw from the Council, with the first being the Krogan, with that too ending in a war. Hurst simply had a very bad feeling that the Council had a tendency to frown upon those that willingly wanted nothing to do with it, feelings that would only be exacerbated by Batarians now seeking asylum in the power they had withdrawn from. All this from a species that had always been seen as rather seedy and amoral by most species, being the only species in the modern day to practice slavery would do that. No matter which way he looked, Hurst saw uncertainty for the Batarian people. A shift in government, economic instability, and badly hurt diplomatic relationships. Many of them were now freer than they had ever been, but far more weren't. And all of them were now in a much less stable situation. Freaking hell, he muttered. I assume you're having a very nice conversation with yourself, but from my perspective you're just mumbling to yourself, Rigg said, his voice cutting through Hurst's thoughts. Look, I think you may want to get some sleep. Or food. Or one of those things organics do when they're upset, I don't fucking know. Just do something. Sighing, Hurst reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn and beaten lighter with a Blue Sun's logo on it, and lit the cigar. Wait, you still have that old thing? Rigg asked, all 3 of his optics whirring to focus on it. I thought it ran out of lighter fluid a long time ago. Oh, it did, I just got it refilled, Hurst said, taking a hefty puff on the cigar while holding the lighter up. In spite of everything, a smile spread across his face. Oh man, remember what happened that day? Yeah, I remember, Rigg spat. I remember us not making anything at the last 3 ports we had stopped at, being forced to use substandard fuel, our engines shorting out, and being forced to make an emergency landing in the middle of a Blue Sun slave trafficking ring. And we literally landed in the middle of it. Hurst said, a deep booming laugh working its way up from his gut. He could still see it. 50 mercenaries who had thought they could buy and sell people as cattle all crushed underneath the hull of Sarah. A nice little bit of karma. And we managed to shoot our way out just fine, with all of the slaves to boot. I'm glad your idea of a good time was a desperate holdout against 50 mercenaries who were angry that you had killed 50 of their friends. I was the one safe inside the ship providing covering fire with the Guardian lasers while you were making runs for the slaves and fuel, and I still remember how we almost died that day. They had more rockets than I was comfortable with. Hurst chuckled. Aren't you uncomfortable with the enemy having any rockets? Yes, but that's not the point. Rigg shouted angrily. The point is that they had enough to do serious damage to Sarah. And if you've got a complete and utter lack of regard for your own life, you'd think that you'd at least care about the ship. If only because I'm expecting to walk down into engineering to find your pants down and shaft deep in an exhaust port. Any day now. Sure, the old girl got a little banged up that day, but it wasn't anything we couldn't handle, Hurst said, giving the control panel behind him a loving stroke. Besides, scars build character. I still got a scare from where one of the Turian mercs clawed me in the leg. No, they fucking don't. Rigg bellowed. Overcoming adversity builds character. Scars are bits of tissue that don't work as well as the old tissue and wave around a flag saying this monument marks the occasion where I fucked up, and you pretending they're anything else is your idealism going to your head and twisting your perception of reality. Again. What the shit are you going to do the day something happens when you finally bite off more than you can chew and you fucking die? Hurst took a long puff on his cigar, smiled, and spread his arms wide. I've made my peace with it. There was a long pause. Hurst watched with mild amusement as Rig's optics all closed and he heard the soft whirring of cleaning solvent being applied to them. After the cleaning process was completed, Rig opened his optics and stared at Rig. I'm sorry, I think my audio receptors are broken. Could you please repeat that? Hurst gave a small shrug. If I die, I die. What's the big deal? The big deal is that you'd be dead. Rig roared, his fury coming back in full strength. Which I think would be a pretty big fucking deal, considering that, out of everyone that lives in the coalition, standard humans have the shortest lifespan. You get 150 years max, a little more if you're lucky, so I don't know why you're in such a hurry to piss it all away when you could be doing something that's a lot less stupid with your time. Hurst shrugged again. Rig, you're functionally immortal. You go in for a repair job whenever you have to and make sure everything is backed up, and you've easily got centuries in front of you. I'm 112. I remember when aliens were the elusive shadows that we only saw when the lights were dim and no one else was checking with us. When the only concept of aliens we had were the proteins and half of us thought that we were all dead. I've seen the galaxy shrink and come to life when all of a sudden we didn't have free rein and were rubbing elbows with a dozen different neighbors. I can't just sit back while all this is happening and not be a part of it. There's a way to be part of it without putting your goddamn life on the line, Hurst. Rig shouted. Hurst gave a wide smile. Yeah. There is. But no ways that I'd be happy with. If I were to stick to major ports and safe transit lanes, I'd probably be safe, rich, and respected. I'd also be bored out of my mind and not doing anything with my life outside of lining my own pockets. Out here, not only do I get the thrill of being on the frontier, I'm actually in a position where I can make a difference. Not a lot of people have a ship and the weapons that we do. See, if I had to pick between living forever, and living a life worth dying, I'm gonna pick the latter each time. Because I'm Franklin Gregory Hurst, and I'll retire when I'm dead. I've got 30 to 40 years left tops, and I'm going to spend those years being the man I've always wanted to be. If I die, I'll die a happy man. Rig was silent for a moment. You're an idiot that's going to get yourself killed, you know that, right? Hurst nodded. And if you had ever reached the point where you couldn't stand it, you would have left a long time ago. But you're still here. And I'm willing to bet that you aren't just content with sitting on your rear and living forever either. That you enjoy the thrill of it too. Well then pay up. I'm not here because of the thrill or whatever hormones are firing off in you to make you think being suicidal is fun. I'm here because you're my best friend, you dumbass. Ah, Hurst said, feeling honestly touched. Rig, you're gonna break my heart. Giving a hearty laugh, he spread his arms wide. Rig gave an annoyed groan. You know I don't do hugs, right? I don't mean that in a condescending way, I am literally incapable of performing a hug. Plasma cannons and flamethrowers aren't good for snuggles. Hurst lowered his arms, but he was still smiling. I'm gonna get one out of you someday. No, you fucking aren't. Hurst let out another laugh, much to Rig's annoyance. Hurst took another puff on the cigar. Well, I might as well go out and see if I can find a good local watering hole. The shipboard booze can get a little sammy after a while. You want me to bring you anything back? Hurst asked. I'd steer clear of the Citadel if I were you, Rig said. You see the news? Our kind, coalition, aren't really welcome there right now. Hurst said, bringing up his Omni tool. I'll see if anyone delivers then. Get a couple of crates for the road. You're looking a little low on flamer fluid too, let's see if we can get anyone to top you off on that. Your manual says your flamer can take council brands just fine so long as we don't mix anything, so that should be fine. Try and find something Turian made, Rig replied. It's more expensive but you get what you pay for. It burns bright and it burns hot. Take it out of my shares if you have to, I don't give a crap. Someone's gotta keep dragging your dumb ass back to life no matter how much you try and throw it away. Can do, Hurst said, pressing a button on his Omni tool, ordering it to connect to the local Citadel network. Then he frowned and pressed it again. He was getting an error message. May want to consider updating too, he said, pressing it a third time to no avail. I've had this model for 20 years, I think I can treat myself to this year's new release. I keep telling you, let me buy the parts and I can build you an Omni tool that's better than any off-the-shelf model, Rig said, sounding annoyed. What is it with organics and being so unwilling to upgrade? How do you think I keep going after all these years? Hurst gave an idle wave. Too much hassle, don't worry about it. Again, his attempt to connect failed. He was starting to get annoyed. Screw it, direct connection then, he said, spinning his chair to Sarah's main communication panel and typing in a series of commands. The same thing happened, with him receiving an error message. He frowned. It was one thing if his Omni tool had crapped out, but now the exact same thing was happening with the much more powerful computers on Sarah. The computers he checked and updated far more often because if something were to go wrong with the navigational data, they might accidentally crash into a moon on the way to a planet. Something's wrong. Rig hovered closer, looking at the exact lettering of the error code. Wait a minute, he said, his optics narrowing as he focused on the image. I'm cross-referencing that with Sarah's database and that error code is showing up anywhere except, oh no. Hurst? That's a government shutdown code. It's what the council uses when they're trying to lock out communication between the Citadel and everything off of it. If you try to get any messages out of the system you'll probably get stonewalled. Only the highest authorization messages would be able to get over it. But why the hell would they be doing that? It'd probably cause a panic if the hub of galactic politics suddenly went dark. I mean, the only reason they'd do this is if the panic from the radio silence would be even worse than the reality of what's going on. He looked at Rig. Rig looked as if he wanted nothing more than to slap Hurst. Oh fuck, Hurst swore. Swiveling his chair, he began to type commands into the navigation panel. Fire up the main engines, he said. We're gonna need to fight or run, and we can't do either locked up in dock. Already on it. Rig replied, doing the same with the controls on his side. What's going on? Did the Krogan let their bloodlust get the better of them and they started a riot? Or did the Rachni pop out of nowhere? Oh no. Hurst saw it too. Signatures popping up all over the sensors of Sarah. Heretic Geth ships. Collector ships. Reapers. All that remained of Saren's forces dropped out of FTL, right in the middle of the Citadel space. With the Citadel's defensive fleet, plus all the warships that had been used to escort the diplomats present. There was a split second of unbearable silence. Then all hell broke loose. Chapter 117. Ragnarok. XXXXX. Rig, get the mass driver spun up and firing. I don't care which one of those ships you're shooting at, but we need that thing firing non-stop. Every second it's primed, ready and not firing is a second where people are dying. Hurst and Rig's hands and appendages were flying over the controls to Sarah. The freighter-turned-privateer ship tore out of the docks, barely avoiding one of the Citadel's arms, facing the incoming enemy fleet. I'm gonna look for any holes in the battle lines and try and shore it up. He checked the sensor readout. In terms of raw numbers, Saren was at a disadvantage. His combined forces was somewhere between 200 and 250 ships, while the combination of Coalition, Enclave, Asari, Solarian, Turian, Valis, Batarian, Krogan, Quarian, and Trugeth ships was nearly at 500. In any other situation, attacking a defensive fleet that was twice your size would be a downright suicidal course of action. Saren, however, was in a situation where there was a decent chance that he might be able to pull it off. Collector ships were far more advanced than any vessel the galaxy had produced, but the Reapers were the real difference makers. 24 of them at the center of the enemy formation. The most advanced ships ever seen in recorded history, who could tip the scales of battle when there was just a few of them. How much damage could they do when there was 24? Chatter was blaring over the comm lines, most of it panicked civilian communications, with the military ones taking up priority. A deep, booming voice was dominating the primary lines. All civilian ships, remain in dock. The Citadel's arms will be closing momentarily. You will be safe inside. If you disengage, we will not be able to guarantee your security, and the arms will not be reopened if they close with you outside it. All civilian ships remain in dock. It repeated. Last chance to head back inside to safety. Rig hollered from the other end of the bridge as Sarah's mass driver roared to life, spitting a slug in the direction of the enemy fleet. We're a lot more lightly armored than most of the military ships out there, and I don't want to be the Molarot that got caught between a herd of feral death claws. We're not civilian, we're privateers. Hurst countered, firing maneuvering thrusters to move Sarah out of the way of a pair of transport ships that had launched out of dock when the fleet had first shown up and were now hastily running back to the safety of the Citadel. We've got a contract with the Coalition and I intend to see it through to the end. Incoming. The fleets were now openly trading volleys now. Saren's forces were still some distance out, well outside the effective range of disruptor torpedoes, but they were being fired en masse anyway. A few of them had come rather close to Sarah, with the Guardian lasers just barely getting them in time. One would think that we could argue that they didn't have a clause about this kind of situation, but screw it. We've already done more than our fair share of pissing Saren off whenever we get the chance, and I'm actually looking forward to continuing our streak. Hold on. He pressed a few buttons, bringing up a small screen in front of him. Geth frigate is listing away from the rest of the fleet. Looks like it took a couple of bad hits, but it's still functioning. Its engines are out but its weapon systems are still online. Oh no you don't. Sarah's cannon thundered again. Hurst watched the shot as the ship's radar tracked it, allowing himself a small smile as it tore through the enemy ship. Okay, core has gone critical, that is a confirmed kill, Hurst said. Keep search for targets of opportunity. Every ship we take away from him is a ship he can never replace. He took a moment to look at the rest of the battle. He had always imagined battles between armadas as brutal yet elegant affairs, with coordinated attacks that mirrored chess moves between two skilled players. None of that was present here. Saren's ships were throwing themselves at the Citadel defensive forces as fast as their engines could push them and not tear themselves in half. The Citadel defense forces, while they had started in standard defensive positions, were already starting to feel the strain of the assault. The Reapers in particular were proving to be very devastating. Their main weapons, some sort of superheated matter stream that Sarah's sensors could barely understand, tore through whatever ships they hit. This heavy assault from the core of Saren's forces, combined with the defensive fleet shifting in an attempt to adapt to the rapid and randomly advancing enemy forces, caused the battle to take on the appearance of a disjointed mess. It looked less like one coherent battle and more like 100 different skirmishes all going on at the same time. No doubt the defensive forces were having a great deal of difficulty coordinating, what with there being around a dozen different galactic powers present and no centralized authority between their forces. Hurst tried and failed to find some sort of plan being carried out, but looking at the holographic display of the battle and listening in on the comm lines both proved to be futile. The former was a jumbled mess, and the latter was so flooded with contradictory commands that it was of no use to him. The battle raged on as the fleets neared each other, the vanguards of both reaching knife fight territory. Explosions were dotting the map as torpedoes detonated, cores went critical, and who knew what else was happening. As the battle raged on, with too many ships on both sides being destroyed for Hurst to keep track of who was winning, the arms of the Citadel began to shift. It was closing. Well, good news is that we won't have to worry about stray slugs hitting the civilian centers anymore, Rigg said as he spotted the movements. Ah shit. In a direct response to the slowly closing arms, hundreds if not thousands of smaller dots had appeared among the swarm of Saren's ships. He had deployed dropships. Looks like he's trying to get them on board the station before his window closes, and it looks like he has enough to brute force his way through Citadel PDC fire. Okay, new secondary priority, Hurst said as Sarah fired another slug. This one shot directly at one of the Reapers and scored a direct hit, though with no noticeable damage done. Keep firing at any capital ship you can get in your sights, I'm gonna reposition the ship to try and catch some of the dropships with Guardian lasers. He grit his teeth as he fired maneuvering thrusters again, causing Sarah to drift to the side, her lasers firing as she went. Maneuvering a starship was tricky business under the most ideal of circumstances. Even if you were in the middle of the void between systems with no one else around, you had to be careful if you didn't want to get flipped upside down or make an unwanted 180-degree turn. Doing it in the middle of an active war zone with munitions being fired in every direction and countless bits of debris flying through space, propelled by explosions that rivaled the yields of nuclear warheads? It felt borderline impossible. Again and again and again, Sarah's mass driver fired. So many free-floating ship parts, explosions, and radiation spikes, and were filling up the battleground that the scanners were getting clogged, with it getting harder and harder to make out what was happening. Technology was advanced enough that the computers could remember where an enemy ship had been the last time it had gotten a clear line of sight, predict where it had moved to based on its last known velocity, and fire a shot based on that calculation, but at the end of the day it was still just an educated guess. Hurst wasn't sure how many of their shots were hitting their target, he only knew that every last bit of firepower was needed. Dropships coming into Guardian range. Rigg reported. Sure enough, hundreds of the dropships were now swarming through the combined fleet, heading for the Citadel right behind them. The arms were about 3/4 closed, but there were still gaps large enough for the dropships to squeeze through. All over the fleet, even though there was a lack of unified orders being given, all Guardian lasers that weren't directly intercepting disruptor torpedoes had turned their attention to the dropships. What was more, the dropships had come into range of the Citadel's defense turrets, which were now openly firing. If Hurst had to make a guess, a dozen enemy dropships were destroyed every second, their packages of ground troops incinerated before they had been permitted to fire a single shot. Lighting them up. Hurst's eyes darted to the section of the display that signified Sarah's position. Dropships were speeding past, ignoring the warships it was passing and simply heading straight for the Citadel, looking almost like they were attempting to ram it. Sarah's lasers fired in a unified barrage at the nearest one, hitting its engines in a united strike. The dropship spluttered and began to corkscrew through space, its maneuvering thrusters firing irregularly. Shit, it's still mobile. Hold on. Rigg punched another series of commands in, and a second volley fired. The engine on the dropship went dead and it shot off into space with its built-up momentum, its corkscrew having sent it well off course from the Citadel. Damn it, these lasers are meant for clearing asteroids and point defense, not direct combat, Rigg snarled, starting to target another dropship. That might be clarified as a mission kill, but I promise you that the Geth, collectors or whatever are still inside and most likely alive. There's always a chance they could bail and try to make it to the Citadel through an EVA jump. Not pretty, but there's always a chance they could make it. The second drop that Rigg targeted took a direct hit, but this time the damage was more minor. The ship began to shudder, but sped onwards, well outside of Sarah's laser range. This is a shit show. It really was bad. Dropships were starting to slip through the Citadel's closing arms, dozens of them unleashing their cargo of soldiers onto the station. Even though lasers and turrets were still killing hundreds of dropships, they were overwhelming the defenses through pure numbers. I don't suppose we could try and kill them with the mass driver. Hurst suggested. Maybe get multiple ones with one shot. Even Sarah's cannon would penetrate through ships that small with no lost impact. Only if you're okay with taking the cannon off of the capital ships that are hauling ass towards us, and frankly I'm not. Rig retorted. The arms are almost closed anyway. At most, a couple thousand enemy troops got onto the Citadel. CSEC alone could take those numbers, and the Citadel is packed to the brim with soldiers from all over. They'll be fine, we need to focus more on the space squids that are looking to tear us all a new asshole. Hurst hissed in frustration. Okay, fine. Target the Reaper that's hurting the most and keep pounding it. See if you can coordinate with the coalition and add to the hurt they're dealing out. Looks like they're focusing their fire on one of the smaller ones, no bigger than the one on Tuchanka, Rig said, highlighting it on the display. He was right, around 30 coalition vessels, including a pair of dreadnoughts, were focusing their fire on one of the lead Reapers. It was maintaining its course and was still fully functional, firing its main weapon and cleaving an Asari frigate in half, but its barriers were starting to fluctuate. Firing. Sarah's cannon roared again and a magnetically propelled slug tore across space and hit the Reaper dead on, shattering on its barrier. Everything we've got on that thing. Lasers, cannons, hell, fire any leftover mining probes we've got. Hurst shouted, repositioning Sarah so she tightened up formation with the coalition ships that they were supporting. There's no way in hell those are going to do any damage to these things, but alright, not like we're gonna be using them for anything else now. Maybe we'll get lucky and they'll waste lasers on them and a torpedo will get through, Rig said dryly. There was a rumbling deep within the ship as the probes were loaded into their tubes and fired. Among the sea of munitions being traded between the two fleets, particularly with the fleets now so close that they were a mere 30 seconds away from knife fight range, the probes were lost in it. The display was so overwhelmed that Hurst couldn't actually see it if the probes even made it to the target. He was so busy squinting, trying to find them again, that he almost missed what was happening to the Reaper. Under the combined stain of so many ships firing on it at once, even its highly advanced kinetic barriers had finally failed. It was now taking direct fire to the hull, slugs and torpedoes tearing away at the outer plating and leaving massive hull breaches. The ship started to falter, listing to the side. Kill it! Kill it! Hurst shouted, but Rig had already loaded, charged, and fired another shot. Whether Rig had meant to do it or it was pure coincidence, the shot went straight into a hull breach that had been torn in the Reaper's front. A plume of fire burst out of the breach and an explosion rocked the Reaper, half of the Reaper's lower appendages being sent floating off as a result. Ha! Hurst shouted as another volley of slugs rained down on the damaged Reaper. Explosions were now peppering the ancient ship, blowing off larger and larger pieces of it, until a massive explosion consumed the ship from the inside, utterly destroying it. Sorry Saren, we broke your toys. Try actually building something yourself next time. Okay, next target, see where the coalition aims at next and give them a hand at it. Oh fuck. The Saren's charge had reached its peak. The two fleets were now at knife fight range. Hurst took a quick glance at the Citadel and breathed a sigh of relief. The arms were now fully closed. Even if every last defending ship was destroyed with all hands lost, the Citadel could hold out until reinforcements could arrive to finish Saren off. No matter how well he fought here, his forces would be badly battered and easy pickings. Saren would lose his fight, it was now just a matter of limiting how many people he dragged down with him. Sadly, the number of people that would be dragged down with him was about to take a radical spike. The Reapers had been dangerous at long range, but at close quarters they were nothing short of deadly. A couple of the smaller ones had been destroyed by heavy concentrated fire, and the Geth and Collector portions of the fleet had taken even heavier damage, but the majority of the Reapers were still intact. What was worse, they were still at full combat efficiency. Hurst watched in horror as they let off a single, unified barrage of their devastating weapons, tearing through the ships around them. The defending ships were so ill-coordinated and tightly packed that many times, a single stream of superheated material would rip through more than one ship. In a mere half a minute, nearly 50 defending ships had been destroyed by the Reaper's assault, and the survivors in the Reaper's immediate area were in full retreat. The Geth and Collectors are getting pasted, Rig reported, but those Reapers are only taking moderate losses tops, and they're fucking eviscerating us. At this rate, it might be better for the fleet to cut its losses and make a run for the mass relay, Hurst said, repositioning the ship along with the still intact coalition portion of the fleet, firing on the concentration of Reaper ships. Regroup with other armadas and then come back. He tensed as the Reapers vaporized the few ships remaining in their immediate area, meaning they had punched a massive hole in the perimeter that had been formed around the Citadel. Any second now, the Reapers would turn about. This move had effectively split the defensive fleet in two, and Saren would have an easy time picking one of the two fleet fragments and overwhelming it. But, much to Hust's surprise, he didn't. Instead, the Reapers and fragmented remains of the Geth and Collector forces pushed through, heading straight to the citadel. What the fuck is he doing? Rig shouted as Hurst forced the ship to turn as hard as he could without tearing it apart, keeping the mass driver focused on the attacking force. The citadel's in its siege mode. It'd take days to break through that with mass drivers. Hurst gawked at this. The larger Reapers were still firing behind them as they went, each of their mechanical tendrils apparently capable of firing their beam weapons, but the smaller ones had forward-fixed weapons and couldn't. All of the Collector and Geth ships had spinal-mounted weapons and could only fire in front of them too. The firepower being rained on the defenders had decreased to a quarter, the lapse giving the two splinter forces to form up and begin to launch a counter-attack. Fire rained down on the Reapers' now exposed flank, decimating the remaining Geth and Collector ships, cutting their dwindling numbers in half, and claimed 2 more Reapers. At a rough count, there were no more than 60 enemy ships left. Hurst began to laugh. Saren had lost his mind and was so obsessed with attacking the citadel that he had doomed his fleet. All they had to do was keep hammering away at his distracted fleet and victory would be certain. But then he thought about it. He thought about exactly what the Reapers were. His laughter began to die down as a feeling of pure horror seeped through his body. "Oh no," he whispered. "What?" Rig asked, sounding confused. "Mass drivers can't get through the citadel's outer plating." "Mass drivers can't," Hurst said. "But you saw the news about what the coalition figured out, right? The Reapers were the ones who made the citadel. It was a trap to lure species in. That means they designed the closing arm feature. And would you ever make an impregnable fortress that you were luring your prey into if there was ever a chance that they could use that fortress against you?" Horrible silence followed these words. Rig broke it. "Are you saying that?" he began, but Hurst nodded frantically, looking at the display. With the exception of a few streams being fired backwards, the Reapers had concentrated all of their firepower on the citadel, specifically at the base that acted as the roots for the arms. Hurst stared for a second, hoping beyond hope that the Reapers had made a critical mistake, that they had made the citadel impervious to even their own weapons. They had not. Whatever temperature their superheated streams reached, it was more than enough. The hull of the citadel was melting away like butter in the hot sun. Within seconds, they had breached it. The arm they had focused on snapped clean off, floating off into space. Hurst saw the array of lights that dotted it flicker, and wondered for a single horrific moment if it would be able to maintain its power grid on its own and maintain a vacuum seal. But he was given no time to know for sure. A second wave of dropships was deployed, flying directly into the massive opening in the citadel, hundreds of them swarming in, with the defense fire from the citadel weakened with an arm missing. As this happened, the Reapers began to turn back to face the fleet, even as dropships trickled out of them, and returned fire at full strength again. A voice roared over the comm lines, broadcasting on all channels. "All ships, do not let the Reapers deploy any more ground forces. Get in there and stop them. They've already done too much damage." Hurst had no idea who was giving these orders and he didn't particularly care. Rage was pumping through him as he saw the dropships flood the citadel uncontested and he slammed forward on the controls, bringing Sarah up to full thrust. There was no option anymore. Those streams of superheated material were more dangerous up close, their effectiveness scaling with range at a much higher rate than mass drivers, but they had to end this fight now. The longer the Reapers survived, the more troops they deployed, the more people would die on the citadel. "So, this is how we finally go out," Rig said, his voice odd. "Well, to hell with it. You never listen when I say you're gonna get us both killed, so why even bother at this point? We got 8 shots left in the mass driver, all I ask is that you keep us alive long enough to use them all up. Here's to hoping the last one goes right down Saren's fucking throat." Hurst nodded, only half paying attention, as he and the rest of the defending fleet charged at Saren as fast as their engines would carry him. If Sarah ran out of munitions, he was ready to ram her directly into a Reaper while overloading the core, preferably Saren's ship. Enough people had died because of his selfish actions. It was about time he became one of them. XXXXX. The citadel was a battleground. Geth, Collectors, and those abominations that were the result of Reaper technology desecrating the dead were swarming all over it. Roger looked at it all through the window of an aircar, snarling in disgust. He and everyone else who had been at the bar were in a pack of aircars that they had commandeered, all of them heading straight for the Presidium. Below them, 1,000 different skirmishes were being fought. The invaders were on every block in the wards, trading fire with CSEC, mercenaries, soldiers, and even a few civilians who were attempting to defend their homes and shops. Their orders were not to take part in the main battle, however. There were reports of a large horde of attackers that were moving on the Presidium. Leaders of nearly every major galactic power were meeting. Any forces that could be spared were being funneled in that direction. "Makes me wish we still had our old rifles," Cheryl said from where she was sitting next to him, a theta energy rifle in her hands as well. We could rain down some supporting fire from here and not worry about running out of ammo, even if it only helped a little bit. She sighed in frustration. These fancy things are powerful, but it brings back old world logistics and all the limitations that come with that. Don't need to tell me twice, I'm the one with a plasma cannon in my arm, Roger replied. I know all about what a pain in the ass that can be. The words were out of his mouth before he could stop himself. Sorry, I know you don't like it when but he was stopped by Cheryl waving her hand at him. Don't worry it, not right now, Cheryl said. It's just, I don't know anymore. She gave a noticeable shrug of the shoulders, sounding angry. For a second it looked like it was all over, bearing a manhunt somewhere down the line, and now all of a sudden the Citadel is under siege? This galaxy has lost its mind. At this point, we're just clinging to bits of driftwood in the middle of a monsoon. Can't exactly tut and wave my finger at you for getting fed up with it all and cursing. It sucks, but she's got a point, Nora said from her seat across the two of them. A cigarette was wedged between her lips. She didn't sound happy either, but instead of Cheryl's more active anger, Nora's tone suggested a more resigned bitterness. Nothing really makes sense anymore. The Council effectively got its prestige and reputation assassinated where the entire galaxy could see it. Add to that the fact that we learned that old robots killed 99% of sentient species that ever existed and Saren has the keys to them, and it's a bit like waking up to find that your house has half collapsed and is half on fire. Guess I was a little premature in giving myself a murderous hangover. Cheryl looked like she was about to say something, but then paused and looked at Nora. When this is all said and done, can we do something that doesn't involve drinking? She hesitated, sounding a little embarrassed, then continued. I mean, I can get the appeal in limited amounts, but it's starting to wear off its appeal for me a little bit. I'd just like the three of us to do something where we can all remember what we did in the morning. It'd just feel better that way, to me anyway. Nora craned her head to look at Cheryl better. Does us drinking bother you? She asked. A question like that could have very easily have come off as an accusation. When Nora said it, it sounded more like concern, maybe with a little bit of panic. Only if you make a habit out of getting utterly wasted, she replied. I like you better when you're you. She reached out across the sky car to put an affectionate hand on Nora's shoulder for half a second before pulling it away. I shouldn't be doing this, she said, sounding upset with herself. We're heading into a major combat zone and there's death happening all around us. Now isn't the time. Roger had to fight back the urge to groan. It sucked to high hell and back, but Cheryl was right. The more mushy moments he had come to enjoy between the three of them would have to wait. Right now, there was a battle that had to be won. Will things be over after this? Jessica, who had the last passenger seat in the sky car. Will things finally calm down? No more killing. Honestly. Roger replied, grateful for the distraction. Impossible to say. A lot of it is gonna to depend on what happens today. A battle against a common foe might be the unification factor that this galaxy needs. Maybe everyone will get the collective sticks up their asses removed after this. Or maybe we'll go back to being passive-aggressive against each other. Operative Lawson hasn't been telling you anything about this? You'd think that she'd know more than all of us. Jessica shook her head. Cerberus isn't in the business of diplomacy. Quite the opposite. We're deployed everywhere where diplomacy has failed or was never going to work in the first place. She's as in the dark as I am, because these matters are on a strict need-to-know basis. And since they don't need Cerberus to contribute to peace talks, all we know is what the average citizen knows. Guess the best we can do is pray, Nora said, taking a drag on her cigarette. Just look at it this way. No matter what happens next, things will get better. It won't be a hot war anymore. The truth about the Reapers took the wind out of everyone's sails on that front. And the captain and matriarch Benazia did the right thing by letting the Rachni Queen go. When the Rachni eventually head back onto the galactic stage, all the anger and mistrust that incident created will fade away. All of our old baggage will still be there, council rules and coalition not sharing our toys, but we will be able to maintain peace with that. Things will get better. Jessica blinked. That's a very optimistic worldview to take. Despite the earlier sourness in her voice, Nora gave a wide grin. Let's put it this way. You gave me some really uplifting news the other day. I have a lot more to look forward to in life than I thought I did. I spent all the time between then and now coming up with plans for what I'm gonna do when I finally turn in my combat vest. It's so exciting that it honestly made me shake a little, and the way I see it, this is one last hurdle of Saren's spite we gotta jump. So let's jump it. How about you? This galaxy is gonna be a complete mess afterward, but there's still ports in the storm all right. Jessica didn't respond. Jessica. The former Special Forces operative was staring out the window, her jaw slack. Roger turned to see what she was looking at. He was certain his heart almost stopped. One of the arms of the Citadel was drifting away, opening up a wide gap in the defensive arms that gave a view out into space. Right outside it, visible even with the naked eye, was Saren's fleet. A horde of dropships was descending from it. Roger slammed his fist against the door to the driver's seat. Cortez. We need you to fucking floor it. The skies are about to get choked with bogies. We're already there. Cortez replied. Sure enough, the air car was descending, as were the other air cars in the same airspace. Roger pressed up against the window as much as he could, trying to see what the situation on the ground was. Several hundred people, some of them military, some of them CSEC, and a few appearing to be local volunteers, were entrenched around the elevator that led to the Presidium. They were heavily dug in, with thrown-up barricades, mounted heavy weapons, and what looked like mines being planted. The air cars landed, the doors flying open, and Roger jumped out, Nora, Cheryl and Jessica right behind him. Bailey, set up 2 more MGS in the second row, I want our firing cones to cover every possible approach. A Turian in CSEC armor with a rocket launcher shouted as the other air cars were emptied. As a blond man hurried to follow his superior's orders, the Turian turned to face the newcomers. Vinary Palin, CSEC executor, who's in command here? That'd be me, Ashley said, disembarking her skycar with Karen and Fox. What's the situation? We got special orders about you, you're all wanted up top, he said, pointing to the elevator. The other ways to the Presidium have been closed off now, a lot of them blocked shut with explosives. Aside from blowing a hole in front the outside, this elevator is the only way in now. We've already sent up a few platoons worth of men with as much ordnance as they could carry, but we're not sure if we can do it for much longer. We'll try and get another load of personnel up there, but there's a possibility you might be the last trip up. An expert at the top has already rigged this elevator to blow if we fall down here. You're all going to be the last line of defense. Good luck. Ashley nodded as the last air car landed, Garis, Lyra, Kazumi, Cornelia and Adam jumping out of it. Okay, everyone make sure you've got all of your kit and in the elevator. She got a series of nods in return, filing into the elevator, many of them cramming themselves into the back in order to make more room for the rest. Roger had a bad feeling that they were pushing the elevator's maximum capacity to the breaking point, particularly with Rex and Fox, but no one stopped them. Executor Palin shot a glance at her. I'm not gonna to pretend I've got a great deal of love for the coalition, he said, but I don't have the luxury of picking allies right now. Save the council, save your leaders. Don't let Saren win if we can't stop him. Ashley nodded, the last of her men stepping onto the elevator before she herself did so. Roger saw that both Ashley and Palin were staring at each other as the doors to the elevator slid shut. A horrible thought cropped up in the back of his mind. He wasn't sure why, but he knew that none of them would ever see Palin again. Slowly, painfully slowly, the elevator began to rise. The elevators on the Citadel had long been a joke by everyone who ever lived on them, a side effect of the sheer size of the Citadel and the need to have transportation across it, but here it was borderline unbearable. Roger felt the overwhelming urge to do something, no matter how inconsequential or meaningless, just so his body would have something to do and take his mind off of the weight. Anything from grinding his teeth to cleaning his rifle, he just didn't want to be painfully aware how long it was taking for them to reach the top of this shaft. He felt something slide into his mechanical hand. It was hard to tell, the sense on his artificial nerve endings had always felt dull compared to the real thing, but he was certain that it was hard and cool. Cheryl's hand. He gave it a tight squeeze and she returned the favor. He took a deep breath. The tension that had been building up inside of him eased. Not by a huge factor, but it was more bearably now. Mercifully, the doors to the elevator slid open not long after that, and all of its occupants rushed out. In the rush to get out, the grip between the two of them was broken and Roger felt a pang of sadness. He told himself that it was all almost over. There was only one more hurdle to clear. The highest and hardest hurdle, but it was the last one. It was all almost over. The Presidium had been turned into a fortress. At least a dozen MGS had been set up, the steps to the upper levels having been layered with metal barricades and soldiers crouching behind them, checking the mounted weapons, and just as many soldiers were manning rocket launchers. Soldiers in power armor with heavy weapons and energy weapons were at the front of the line, Coalition, Enclave and, to Roger's shock, Solarian. The reptilian aliens were wearing power armor that was much more compact than typical power armor, though it still made the normally slim Solarians look bulkier than Turians in regular armor. Both their armor and the boxy energy weapons looked slapdash, to the point where they were most likely prototypes being field tested for the first time. Still, Roger wasn't about to say no to more power-armored soldiers. Despite this, a small part of him recognized this for what it was. The Coalition's monopoly on its advanced technology was over. For decades the Council had wanted energy weapons and the Coalition hadn't shared. It and power armor had given the Coalition an edge that enabled it to negotiate with the Council on equal terms. Now, after all these years, the Council had taken it for itself, and there was no closing Pandora's box. It was in circulation among the scientific minds of the Council, they had finally figured it out. The coalition might have theta energy weapons, but the gap between them and regular energy weapons was much smaller than the gap between energy and kinetic. And even then, after this battle, there was a chance the Council could always salvage lost theta energy weapons and truly even the technological battleground. Clear the lift, we're gonna to be detonating the thing. A voice shouted. Roger blinked. He knew that voice. Looking around as the last of the passengers disembarked, he saw a woman in black armor kneeling by the entrance to the elevator, checking a series of explosives that had been planted there. Specialist Benson, he said. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted Cheryl and Nora turn to look at the woman in surprise. Maria tilted her head up, looking away from her work. Her eyes widened. You, she said, looking at all three of them. You're all here. I 1 second. She turned back to the charges and made some last-second alterations, checked something on her Omni tool, before shouting that they were all clear. Getting up, she looked at them again. I'm glad you're all okay. The silence that followed was painfully uncomfortable. Lewis Hartley had been dishonorably discharged and shipped off to who knew where, but the damage he had done was still present. Getting rid of him had only been step 1 in the healing process, and it was mainly to make sure that he didn't do anything worse. Nora looked as if she was thinking how much she wanted to track him down and snap his neck, but Roger was certain she had reached the point where she knew that wouldn't solve anything. Hartley wasn't a factor anymore, he didn't matter. His victims did. Look, Roger said, deciding that he had to say something, even if he was making things up as he went. We never got a chance to talk to you during that whole mess, but if you ever need some support, we're willing to do whatever we have to. I don't know if that means much to you, but I mean it. Maria gave a weak smile. I believe you. And I'll think about it. I may take you up on that offer, but I just can't think about the logistics of it right now. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound dismissive, I just have other things on my mind right now. Her eyes slid to the side, focusing on Cheryl. Are you okay? She said, her voice growing uncertain. I know better than anyone what it feels like to be stuck alone in a room with him. It's... Her voice trailed off. I know, Cheryl said, her voice heavy. Roger made to move towards her, but Nora beat him to it, wrapping a comforting arm around Cheryl and giving her a gentle squeeze. Even through the wrappings that covered her face, Roger recognized her jaw moving to form a smile. It doesn't go away, not just like that. You have a support net, right? It's not a cure to everything, but in my experience it helps so much. Maria nodded. My mom and little sister. The plan was to meet up with them here for a little improvised vacation, help me recover. The plan was that I would arrive early in the day and they would show up later on, but then flights to the Citadel started getting travel warnings with the violence that had been breaking out. I was honestly just trying to head back home when this whole mess happened. She swallowed. God, if they had gotten here. Roger knew all too well what it felt like to have your family in the middle of a war zone. At least Maria's family had been spared being caught in the crossfire, a silver lining in a very bad situation. But I'm here, there was some spare gear lying around, and I signed up to be a Morian shock trooper for a reason. To keep them safe. And I've got enough in me to see this through to the end. Her smile was still on the weak side, but it grew just a bit. You and I need to keep the idea of what Morian shock troops are supposed to be alive. People like Hartley and Stone aren't going to do it. Amen, Roger said. Maria looked like she was about to say more when a cry of joy cut through the air and the next thing Roger knew, she had been tackle-hugged by Cornelia. It's so good to see you again. Cornelia said, squeezing Maria tightly. Alarm bells started going off in Roger's head, wondering if getting so physical with someone after they had been through everything Maria had been through was okay. Despite this, a full-blown grin had grown across Maria's face as she returned the hug. It's so good to see you again, she said, and Roger discarded his concerns. Cornelia and Adam had been the ones who had been working with Maria to take care of the Hartley situation. It was more than likely, given the kind of person Cornelia was, that something had come out of that situation. It was further emphasized by Adam approaching right after Cornelia, putting a hand on Maria's shoulder. Come on, Nora said, we should get set up. The rest of the Normandy crew had taken up position in one of the middle barricades. Roger, Nora, Cheryl, and Jessica joined them, with Cornelia and Adam following after a bit. Any last-minute specifics? She asked Ashley. The VIPs have a panic room that they're taking shelter in. Vacuum sealed, radiation shielded, hard suits, everything you could think of and more, and it's directly behind us, Ashley said. Our priority is to make sure that no one breaches it, Ashley said, unholstering an odd-looking rifle. Roger recognized it as a pulse rifle and remembered that they had been issued 3 of them when they had been sent after Saren. That had felt like an eternity ago, so long that he had almost forgotten that they had a third one. At least it was in the field and not stuck on the Normandy. Wait a minute, Karen said, looking around. Where's the captain? Roger blinked before doing a double check of the barricade. Karen was right. All of the Normandy combatants were there except for Jane Shepherd and Rex. Is she in the panic room? I don't know, Ashley said, her head turning as she herself tried and failed to find her CO. Come to think of it, I don't see Operative Lawson either. I don't think she would be the type to be taking cover in a siege. I think something is up. Roger couldn't disagree with that statement, but he wasn't given any time to think about it. Report from down below. A voice shouted, earning total silence from the accumulated soldiers. An Asari was near the top of the steps leading up, reading her Omni tool. Enemy forces are engaging the first line of defense. Everyone ready up. Jessica and Kazumi both disappeared from view, her active camouflage swallowing up their armor. The Normandy slid into cover and took aim with their weapons, Theta energy weapons, lasers, and Ashley's pulse rifle all aimed at the elevator shaft. The minutes ticked by at a painfully slow rate. There weren't any more updates from the forces down below. That was to be expected, people fighting for their lives didn't stop to give a play-by-play, but the silence was enough to make everyone skittish. Roger could feel it slowly starting to sprout in him, even as he used mental exercises he had mastered over the years of his military career to force himself to stay calm. He could see it in the others too. The occasional twitch, masterfully suppressed but still visible if you knew what to look for. After what felt like half an hour, Roger let himself hope that the attack had been repulsed. It had been a foolish hope. Blow the elevator. The Asari at the top roared, terror leaking into her voice. Now. Maria had taken cover near the top of the barricades and her finger had been on the trigger after the first word. Explosions rocked the top of the shaft and a horrible screeching noise filled the presidium as the car itself began to free fall down before eventually fading out of sight. That'll just slow them down. The Asari shouted. They'll be climbing up with mag boots next. No matter what happens, this line can't break. Galactic civilization as a whole is counting on every last one of you. Roger felt nauseous for a second. Everything was hanging in the balance again. Had the galaxy always been in such a fragile state that it was a second away from disaster? Sensors are picking them up. Here they come. Roger refocused on the sights of his rifle, waiting. Utter silence was king in the presidium as they dug in forces waited. The only time it was broken was when one of the Solarians in power armor spoke quickly and hurriedly to his subordinates. Roger caught something about hold the line, but couldn't make out the rest. Then noises started to echo out of the shaft. Heavy clangs of metal on metal. He tensed. Then they started to emerge out of the shaft. Geth climbed out, collectors flew out with their insect-like wings, the mutated husks of the fallen came out shrieking and snarling. With no need for orders, every last weapon burst to life and drowned the first attackers in a tsunami of fire. But there was a heavy weight hanging over the defenders that none needed to clarify out loud. This was only the tip of an assault that would be made of everything Saren had left. XXXXX. Jane Shepherd stood grimly in the Normandy's depressurized airlock. It had been a close call, getting from the presidium to the dock where the Normandy was before the arms had been closed, but she had managed it. Barely. She was in full armor, her pulse rifle in hand, Valkyr's Theta energy pistol at her side, and her plasma rifle at her back. Admiral Anderson and Fleet Admiral Hackett had given her a simple order. Cut off the head of this attacking force and make sure that Saren was never a threat to anyone ever again. We've got an opening, Captain, but it's a narrow one, you've got maybe 7 seconds of wiggle room, Joker said over the comm lines. I'm bringing us in, be ready to make the jump the second I give you the all clear. Copy that, she said briskly, giving a quick glance at the other 2 people with her. Miranda Lawson was at her right while Rex was at her left. The 3 of them and just the 3 of them attempting to storm Saren's flagship. It wasn't an idea that she was particularly fond of, she wished that there had been time to gather the rest of her crew for a full-strength assault. But they had their orders and Jane had every intention of accomplishing them, no matter how impossible. Eva thrusters look nominal, Miranda said, checking her Omni tool. We should be able to get a few thousand meters out of them while staying too cool for heat sensors to pick up. Ideally anyway. We would fly under the radar of the scanners of most galactic powers, but there's still a lot we don't know about Reaper capabilities, so we should prepare for alarms to be tripped just in case. Wouldn't be too bad if that happened, Rex said, checking his Claymore shotgun one last time. Let Saren stew in his own juices because he knows we're coming for him. If he's got enough sense in him to know that he should be afraid. Shame that he may not be anymore. Even if he wins here and manages to crack the Citadel in half, he's a dead man. He'd be on the receiving end on the biggest manhunt in galactic history, there wouldn't be anywhere for him to hide. The Council would annex the entirety of the Terminus systems if that's what they had to do to track him down. I think he came here to die. This attack does seem particularly suicidal in nature, Miranda said. The damage being done to his fleet is devastating. He won't be able to operate independently with his reduced numbers. Rex has a point, Saren has abandoned all pretense at self-preservation. The ceasefire was probably a sign to him, that all of his efforts were going up in smoke. He had no allies left and he had to risk it all in order to accomplish his goal. That's the more complex explanation. The simpler one is that he's enraged at what he sees as betrayal and is trying to kill as many people as possible out of spite. Spite it is then, Rex said. Saren's been coming off as the spoiled little kid who didn't want to share his toys for some time now. He thought he could rule, use, and discard my people. It takes a special kind of arrogant to do that. Wouldn't put it past him that he thinks he's the only one who can rule the galaxy, and he's taking it badly that just about everyone else thinks he's exactly the wrong person for the job. Rex flipped off the safety on his shotgun. Enough is enough though. Life isn't his delusional fantasy where he will bring order to all civilization. He's done whatever he wants, thinking he was in the right the whole way, and he's been getting away with it the whole time. It's time for his actions to finally have some consequences. Agreed, Miranda said, nodding briskly, lowering her omni-tool and drawing a rifle. Her biotics gave an experimental flare, the same happening with Rex. Okay Captain, we're entering the window of opportunity in 10 seconds, Joker said. EDI's gonna do her thing and try and make sure you don't trip any alarms, but no promises. This stuff is seriously the most advanced technology known to all sapient life. There was a pause. Okay, threading the needle, there's a lot of debris floating around here and getting so much as hit by a rusty nut will give it away that we're here, so I gotta time this just right. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. Go. The door slammed open and all three members of the boarding party fired their EVA thrusters. Both Shepard and Rex had been given double the normal amount, Jane due to her armor and Rex due to his natural bulk, to maintain the same speed as Miranda. It was always disorienting to be in a vacuum. The sudden loss of sound from the outside world felt wrong in a way that training could never fully remove, but it was far worse in the middle of a pitched battle. All around her, Jane saw the largest naval battle of the century taking place. Hundreds of destroyed ships floated lifelessly through the void, mass drivers thundered as the remains of the defending fleet fired on the Reapers replied with their blinding beams, smaller strike craft darted back and forth between the two forces, and Jane couldn't hear anything aside from her own breathing. She forced herself to focus on the ship directly in front of her. The rest of the ships were dozens, if not hundreds of kilometers away from her, some of the ships being tiny specks in the distance that she only knew were ships due to the slugs that would fly in from that direction. Even this massive distance was considering fairly close range by Navy combat standards. Not quite knife fight range, but close. Saren's flagship, on the other hand, was a single kilometer away. The distance between the Normandy and this Reaper was less than the entire length of the enemy ship itself. As Joker had put it, he was practically kissing it. But this range was the only way to effectively get from one ship to another with EVA thrusters in the middle of a pitched battle. The second they cleared the ship, a bright blue light flared behind them and Jane knew that Joker was taking the Normandy out of the Reaper's immediate area. He would maintain a holding pattern at a safe distance until the mission was complete. This would have been a lot easier if we had another suitcase nuke, Rex said over the close comm lines. Gonna be a lot harder to kill this thing without it. Here's hoping that EDI is up to the challenge. The flight to the Reaper was smooth for the most part, though not without complications. Micro debris would occasionally impact their armor, pushing them off course and forcing them to make corrections in order to make sure that they stayed on course. Jane winced as a particularly large chunk, around the size of the tip of her finger, smashed into the side of her helmet. She could feel the dent pressing in on her temple, but thankfully no major damage had been caused. Finally, they were at the end of their jump, landing on the outer hull of the Reaper and attaching to it with mag boots. So these things actually have airlocks, Rex mused as they circled one. Nasty when you stop and think about it. Why would a bunch of sentient starships need airlocks? Then you remember the whole brainwashing thing they had going on. No pleasant implications here. This momentary broke through the fog that was consuming Jane. It was indeed a very unpleasant implication, one that raised all sorts of questions about the Reaper's designs and origins. I am attempting to bypass Reaper security protocols without tripping alarms, EDI reported. It is proving to be quite difficult. This security is state-of-the-art, far beyond anything designed by either Coalition or Council. I am confident in saying that, if this was a sapient Reaper, it would be far more proactive in searching for digital intrusions. This system seems rather passive, and I doubt Saren had the capability to upgrade it. Still, even with all of the above, I am only just barely making it through. Another few seconds passed. Very well, I have triggered airlock. Please enter before Saren notices. The airlock slid open at a radically fast yet smooth pace. All three of them were inside the second it was fully open, the blast doors sliding shut behind him. I am doing what I can to pull up schematics of the ship, but the data I am receiving is fragmented, EDI said as the hissing of air being pumped into the airlock filled the room. I will guide you as you go. Please avoid combat if possible. Time is of the essence and we lack the numbers for prolonged combat. This'll be interesting, Rex said as the hissing stopped. Combining a mission we're great at, sabotage, with the mission we suck at, assassination. Let's see what happens when success and failure smashed together, because I doubt it'll give me a dead brother this time. No one responded. All right, I can take a hint, Rex said, his voice level as the other end of the airlock slid open and all three of them exited, weapons at the ready and spreading out. Patrols are minimal, most of Saren's forces seem to be landing on the citadel, but even he had enough sense to leave behind a token garrison, EDI said. Even if it's just because he forgot to program them to take part in the ground invasion. Very well, take a right and move forward until you see a four-way passage. Take the EDI, the plan was to head towards the engines, but I need you to chart two paths, Jane said abruptly. One towards the engines, the other towards the bridge. It's one thing to destroy this ship and blunt the enemy assault, but we can't let Saren escape again. He may still have contacts out there that he can use to cause further damage if he escapes, or maybe some forces we don't know about. Captain, that is highly unlikely, Miranda said at once. As we mentioned before, Saren's attack is downright suicidal in nature. I do not see him attempting to abandon ship, even when it is being destroyed. He will most likely stay and fight to the bitter end. Jane could see the logic in Miranda's arguments, but she had long since made up her mind. Saren wasn't leaving this nebula alive, and she was going to make sure of it personally. Even if the risk is only a 1% chance, it's a risk that we can't take, she replied sternly. Too many people have died because of him, directly and indirectly. Millions of innocent people from everything that's happened over the last few months. Eden Prime, the near glassing of Thurum, the massacres on Cor Mali that he kick-started, both battles of Tuchanka, the raids on Moria, the engineered riots on Adek, the actual glassing of Tylev, the slaughter of Surkesh, the people dying right now on the Citadel, none of it would have happened without him. While the hatred and viciousness that had caused the majority of these vile acts had been there before Saren had arrived, he had still set off the domino effect that had engineered them all. He was the architect of all that death, whether he had meant to or not. We need absolute certainty when it comes to Saren, no half measures, she said. EDI. Do you have anything on which direction the bridge is? Rex and can handle the engine, I'll take the bridge. Both of her fellow boarders were staring at them now, obviously concerned. Miranda wanted them to understand, but she didn't need them to. All that was truly needed was that they hit one vital point while she hit the other. We don't have time to argue about this, hundreds of people are dying every second we delay, she said simply. Rex gave a reluctant shrug, while Miranda gave her a piercing stare that suggested that she was doing this against her better judgment. I have preliminary routes for both destinations, EDI said. Captain, are you certain that? Quite certain EDI, Jane said, interrupting the AI. Please hurry and give me directions, we've wasted too much time already. Do the same for Rex and Miranda with their destination. There was a momentary pause before EDI acquiesced. Go in the opposite direction, head down through 3 intersections then take a left. The rest is still unclear, I am working on it. EDI sounded rather dejected, even though her voice didn't leave a great deal of room for emotional expression. I am now providing instructions to the others as well. Good, Jane said, giving Miranda and Rex one last look. I'll see the two of you when all of this is over. With that, she turned and charged into the depths of Sovereign as fast as her power armor would allow. Speaking under her breath as she did. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to make this right. Chapter 118. Twilight. XXXXX. Rex had learned that his gut was his most trusted advisor a long time ago. His gut had told him that his father was up to something just before he had tried to kill him. He had gotten similar feelings that something was wrong when they had learned about the genophage cure, with those only leaving him after Jane had promised to put him in command of the tribes of Tuchanka. They were screaming out to him right now that absolutely everything was wrong with what they were doing, that they needed to head back and drag Jane down with them to the engines. And yet he ignored them. Saren had killed John. That had stung more than when Rex had lost his brother, and he could only imagine what it was doing to Jane. She was heading to confront him, leaving no doubt in Rex's mind that she wanted revenge. Well, he wasn't going to deny it to her. No matter how wrong it felt, he respected Jane Shepherd too much to take something that she was owed away from her. And if anyone had the right to snuff Saren's life out, it was her. He could only pray that his gut was wrong for once. He and Miranda were following EDI's every command to navigate through Saren's capital ship. Stop here, move forward there, take a ladder down 2 levels here. Things had gotten momentarily awkward when he had gotten stuck in a ladder chute that had been a little too small for him. Thankfully his biotics had allowed him to force himself through it, all to avoid the patrols that were ever present throughout the twisting corridors of the ship. Though not as ever present as Rex had assumed they would have been. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would have expected every last intersection on this ship to be packed with geth, collectors, and those things Saren keeps making, Rex said, keeping his voice low. He's too paranoid to let something like that slip under him. He's got his own private army of mindless servants. He would pack this ship to the brim. So, if they're not here, they're all on the citadel, aren't they? This is a lowered guard created from an all-out attack. Miranda nodded stiffly. I can't fault your logic. She didn't say anything else after that. Rex had never been the type for pointless small talk, so he felt no strong urge to try and keep the conversation going after that. But the implication lay heavy in the air about what exactly the location of Saren's ground forces meant. All of it was horrifically bad news, particularly when the majority of the Normandy crew was still on it. He wished EDI would give them directions a little more quickly, but kept his mouth shut. There was no point in rushing this, that would only make things worse. Take a right up here, the AI said as they reaching a 5-way intersection, all of the turns splintering off unevenly. Your first right. You're almost there. Rex and Miranda took the right in question, moving down yet another winding corridor. The design of the Reaper felt off. Exposed wiring was everywhere, far more than it felt like the ship would need, all of it glowing with the same pale blue light that was in the cybernetic corpses. That, combined with the unnatural layout of the ship, the winding, non-linear corridors, gave Rex the uncomfortable feeling that they were rooting around in the guts of a living thing. Rex would never admit it to anyone, but there was one point in his life when he had felt true horror. It had been during his rite of passage when a thresher maw had appeared. That happening was rare but hardly unheard of, and it was considered a worthy rite if the Krogan being tested could simply survive the arrival of a maw. He had decided he would settle for killing it. And he had, even though his method had involved climbing into the beast's mouth and blasting its internal organs apart with a shotgun. The thrill of victory had given way when the thing had died and left Rex trapped inside the thing with his way out cut off. Fear had gripped him then and driven him to a desperate rage, clawing his way out until he finally found the mouth again. No one had realized what had happened in there, and he had felt no urge to correct that. Now that he was over 1,000 years older and 1,000 years more experienced, he had never encountered a fear like that again. But the inside of this Reaper was slowly starting to remind him of the time he had been trapped inside the gut of a dead giant. "To get up ahead," Miranda said. Rex nodded. A pair of run-of-the-mill troopers were passing through a junction up ahead. The two came to a momentary halt to let them pass before beginning to move again. Rex took a quick look down the path they had gone to make sure that they weren't doubling back before moving forward. You should be coming up on the door to the engines in 500 meters, EDI said. 400 meters. You should have a direct line of sight. We see it, Miranda said. Sure enough, an utterly massive blast door was at the end of the hallway they were currently in. A looming black door that was wide and tall enough for 2 columns of Yogg to walk through comfortably. Can you get it open? I will try. However, I must warn you that the room beyond will contain a high number of hostiles, in addition to whatever personnel Saren has dedicated to operating the engines. If they raise an alarm to summon reinforcements, I will not be able to do anything to stop them. You will have to return to the nearest airlock and use your EVA packs to escape. You may be adrift for some time if the Normandy cannot reach you safely. EDI paused. I am sorry. A 0G trip, what's the big deal? Rex asked, gripping his assault rifle and claymore shotgun tightly. Hurry up and let us get to the interesting part. Miranda nodded. Very well. I understand. There was a brief pause. Don't leave any standing, EDI said, her voice surprisingly vicious. Rex grinned. She understood it so well. Doors opening. Both Rex and Miranda tensed as the door slid open, prepared to face the horde of enemies on the other side. 2 things hit Rex in rapid succession. The first was confusion, wondering why, in the second most vital position on his flagship, Saren had only left a single guard. The second was realization. Because the single guard was a massive, hulking behemoth. Easily 12 feet tall, 6 feet wide, the thing easily dwarfed Rex as it turned to look at him. 8 pale blue eyes looked at him, veins of the same color pulsing in the thing's muscles, all of which just as thick as Rex's head. Despite this, the abomination seemed to have what looked a pot belly, except the pot belly was a see-through material with a coil of glowing blue cybernetics cluttered inside. The monster raised both of its hands, one of them a series of sharpened claws, while the other a heavy cannon. Raising the cannon to aim, its jaw opened in a 3-way split, revealing countless shows of tiny sharp teeth as it let out a horrific roar. Miranda and Rex both split off, running forward in different directions as a blue blob lurched out of the cannon, ungracefully arcing through the air until it landed where they had just been, exploding. Rex recalled hearing that the Reaper's weapons had been some sort of superheated metal fired in a stream, and unless he was mistaken, this looked like a massively downsized version of it. He could feel the heat even from this distance. As he moved, he scanned the room. The core of the Reaper was an utterly giant sphere on the upper far wall, several layers of rings rotating around a very recognizable center of element 0. It was easily the biggest core that Rex had ever seen in his life, even dreadnought cores looked puny next to it. It was only logical, a ship as massive as this Reaper would need a power source to match it, but even Rex had to admit he was impressed. And feats of engineering were not something he was easily impressed by. "Wonder how smart this thing is," Rex said, reaching the far wall, just beneath the core, and firing a few shots at what had once been a Yogg. He only chipped the thing's shields, but it got it looking in his directions, raising its cannon. Rex's biotic aura flared around him and he jumped. He had never been the dexterous type, but he was able to get up high enough that he was directly between the disfigured Yogg and the core. However, instead of firing mindlessly, it hesitated, the glowing hue around its cannon stalling and then fading as it lowered its cannon. Instead, it charged forward, its claw opening wide. "And the mindless monster is smarter than the one calling the shots," Rex grumbled. Landing firmly on the ground, he raised his shotgun and fired twice. He was able to get the Yogg to jerk its head back, but that did nothing to slow down its charge. Rex ducked to the side just in time, spewing assault rifle rounds as he went. Even as the thing slammed into the wall, noticeably not leaving a dent despite its massive frame, its clawed arm went wide, swiping at Rex. Rex's barriers folded like wet paper before the vicious swing, and he could feel it tearing through his armor. He was half sure that the tips of its claws had managed to graze his skin, but his Krogan biology was working overtime and he barely felt it if it had. He let his assault rifle continue to spray while also firing off another shotgun blast, checking the heat gauge on the side to ensure he didn't accidentally overload the thing. His fire earned another jerk of the head, but the shields on the cybernetic colossus were practically tank-grade and held firm. With Rex no longer near the core, the Yogg raised its cannon again, charging up another shot, ignoring the assault rifle rounds that were pinging off of it. Rex was about to make a snap judgment about which way to dodge when a bolt of biotic energy shot from the side and hit it straight in its cannon. It only jerked to the side by a few inches, but that was enough for the shot to go very wide, far to Rex's side and into the wall. Miranda strafed the Yogg cyborg from the back, an SMG blazing in one hand while another orb of biotic energy was thrown from the other. Rex moved in tune with her from the other end, keeping a stream of fire coming from his own end. Their best bet with something this big was to keep chipping away at it until they could do more lasting damage. The one upside to it was that it seemed to have been designed to deal with large crowds and anti-tank operations. It didn't seem like it had been designed with one or two commandos in mind. Doubtless, it would have normally been deployed with other infantry to balance this out, but it was being ordered by Saren. The Yogg ignored Miranda ever, continuing to focus on Rex, apparently having decided that he was the larger priority. Again it lunged forward, claw bared, and this time Rex wasn't fast enough to dodge. He managed to squeeze off another shotgun blast as the abomination barreled into him, for all the good it did. The viciously sharp and long claws tore his shotgun in half before ripping into his sides, bright orange blood spilling out and onto the floor. Fairly certain that one or two of his organs had just been split open, Rex summoned up all the biotic strength he could manage and shoulder-checked the Yogg with all of his strength. The pain in his side was only a minor ache, but those claws cut so deep that if it got another swing at, there was a very good chance that even his redundant organ system would collapse under the strain. It wouldn't matter how much it did or didn't feel it then. His physical counterattack on the cyborg produced some results, if not quite as much as he would have hoped. It stumbled back a few steps, enough to at least get some distance between the two of them. Another blast from the shotgun came dangerously close to causing his weapon to overheat, but with the Yogg had already been off balance, and tumbled over. Deciding that he might not get a better chance than this, Rex let out a roar and charged forward, biotic energy flaring around him. Miranda was still darting back and forth with impressive skill, pelting the Yogg with a mixture of bullets and biotic energy, finally shattering the thing's kinetic barrier, but Rex took a different approach. Climbing on top of the thing, he flipped his shotgun over in his hands, raised it up, and began to viciously drive the stock into the creature's mouth. Finally, mercifully, he heard the very satisfying sound of bone and teeth breaking. A few of the tiny teeth he had seen before went flying off to the side, with one side of the three-split mouth dangling loosely from the alien's jaw. A few more biotically enhanced strikes earned Rex a very cloud crack that didn't seem visibly related to the creature's jaw at all, giving Rex a very good feeling that he had just cracked the thing's skull. Though to what degree he had no idea. Rex wanted very badly to stay on top and continue whacking away until he managed to burst the thing's head wide open, but he knew when he was pushing his luck. With one last blow for good measure, he threw himself off. He had had the right idea, but he had done so just a moment too late. The Yogg cyborg's claw flashed in the air as he dove, catching his free hand. There was an unpleasant jolt as he felt one of the talons catch on his bone and then snap cleanly through it. Rex failed to land properly and went sprawling a few feet before he was able to recover and force himself back into a standing position. He could feel something hard scraping against the inside of his armor, and glancing at his arm, he saw a bloody mess that was leaking through his armor, hanging weakly at his side. He growled. Even with limited pain, he was barely going to be getting anything out of that arm now. 2 more shots from his shotgun echoed out, blowing away large portions of the Yogg's head, taking off the upper third of it. At any other point, this would be where the poor sap that Rex had just scalped would fall over dead. There was no such luck with the Goliath of a thing that was standing before them. In fact, it barely seemed to have been slowed down. Again, the thing lunged forward, claws bared. A desperate idea popped into Rex's head. There was no way he was going to be able to properly dodge in time, so he tried something else. Standing his ground, he leveled his shotgun and fired a third time. Bright red warnings flashed to life on the display of his weapon, informing him that he had overheated his gun, but his aim had been true. The claws of the creature shattered under the force of the blast, splintering at the base and exploding outward, only leaving blunt bases. When the shattered talons bore into him, it was less of a piercing blow and more of a blunt one, and it spared him from another opening being torn into him, but it was still hardly a light blow. The chest plate of his armor bent under the strain of the blow and he was sent flying back against the wall, several loud cracks echoing as he went. He grunted as he forced himself back up. There was enough pain in his body now that he was feeling an undeniable ache of pain all over now, even if it was more of an irritation than anything else. He could feel the front of his armor embedded in his chest now, and a couple of his ribs felt like they had been broken and embedded on something inside his body. Most likely an organ, but for the life of him, Rex couldn't remember which ones. Maybe a heart. The claymore hadn't cooled down yet and was still locked up, so Rex took the only other opportunity he had right now. Dropping his shotgun, he forced both of his arms up. Even if he couldn't get any strength out of his mangled one, all he needed to do was get it to perform the needed motions. Biotic energy flared around him and he shot a stream of it directly at the Yogg, though not with the intention to cause damage. Not yet anyway. It hit dead on and purple light enveloped the beast. Normally Rex would be able to idly fling anyone hit by this into the air, where they would be easy targets. However, he had never attempted it on anything that weighed this much, and the Yogg had to weigh several tons with all of its cybernetics. The thing attempted to move forward, only to awkwardly float up a few inches before landing clumsily, its legs sliding apart and almost falling over. Rex's entire body strained as the Yogg looked down, blinking in confusion at its legs. It took another tentative step forward, its effective decreased mass causing it to hop forward as if it was in low G. The Yogg's limbs flailed wildly in the air, all of them attempting to correct itself, arcing downward and skidding across the ground. Pointed talons on the thing's feet screeched against the ground, sparks flying up as it did. But, even though the Yogg was now moving with the grace and agility of a drunk Varan, it was very much moving in Rex's direction still, and decreased mass wouldn't stop it from firing its cannon. Then, without warning, there was a flash of purple behind it. Miranda arced into the air, landing firmly with one leg on each of the Yogg's shoulders. Her SMG flared in her hand, firing a burst at point blank into one of the cyborg's eyes. With lightning precision, she switched from eye to eye, the barrel leaving one eye and moving into the next the second the flash had disappeared. Within mere seconds, all of the Yogg's remaining eyes had been burst wide open, dribbling down the side of its face like rotten fruit. Letting out a deafening roar, both of the Yogg's arms reached up, broken claws and cannon both. The cannon fired randomly, missing Miranda and impacting on the ceiling instead. Miranda dove off of the Yogg, sliding on the ground and coming to a stop right next to Rex. In a single, fluid motion, she rose to one knee and extended her hands, her biotic energy joining Rex's. That was beautiful, Rex said simply. Miranda didn't respond, focusing all of her attention on the Yogg. Through her helmet, Rex could see her face tense with concentrations, a vein in her temple noticeably pulsing. Rex by himself had not been enough, but with the added strength of Miranda, it was enough. Slowly, the monster was lifted off of its feet, gravity no longer applying to it. Arms and legs swung wildly through the air, causing the whole body to spin. The cannon fired, again and again, never hitting the Krogan or the Cerberus operative, but coming rather close. Now, I had a bit of a plan for this thing, I wonder if you were thinking along the same lines, Rex said. He turned his arms to the side, angeling the floating Yogg. Miranda followed suit. After a few more adjustments, the Yogg was aiming face first at the Reaper core. Rex shot Miranda a quick glance. She nodded. Rex let out a deep laugh. You coalition types, I love the way you think. He was fairly certain that some muscles in his arm were starting to tear. Combined with all the other injuries that he had sustained, he was now in an overall state of discomfort, but he ignored it. On 3. 1. 2. 3. The Yogg, a struggling ball of cybernetics and muscle, was hurled directly into the glowing core. The protective field around it shattered, the behemoth was sucked into the interior and was ripped apart into pieces so tiny that Rex was certain it had been vaporized on the atomic level. With that, the Element Zero core began to react violently. Bolts of blue and purple energy sparked out of it, nearby plates buckled, a few even being ripped off and sucked into the depths of the core, and the entire room shook. We just triggered a critical core failure. Miranda said sharply. We have 5 minutes at the very most until it reaches its pinnacle. Moving to Rex's side, she produced a vial of pale yellow gel and began liberally applying it to Rex's side where he had been injured. For a second, Rex thought it was Medigel until the gel started to stretch over the gaps in his armor, sealing it tight. He gave it an experimental knock. It held firm. Ah, right, don't want the organs I have left being sucked out into the vacuum when we make the jump for it, Rex said. He wondered if all non-Krogan always had to be this careful about their organs. It would be a very paranoid way to live, but it couldn't be helped. Nearly every other species in the galaxy only had the one set. Exactly, Miranda said, standing up and pressing her hand to her helmet. EDI, we achieved our objective, the core is damaged beyond repair. We need the nearest airlock and an EVA pickup, stat. At once, the AI responded in the affirmative, relaying directions for them that they began to follow at once. The two of them ran out of the engine room, following EDI's direction as fast as they could. Just for the record, the two of us just destroyed an old starship that killed the Proteans and was the flagship for the biggest war criminal in living memory, Rex said. You and I have both earned a couple of life-sized, oh what am I saying, bigger than life-sized statues. I'll put them together myself if no one else wants to. Run any specifics you want in yours by me, if you have a preferred outfit or pose. He looked at her. I may ask you to hold a second SMG, it strikes a more impressive look. With my line of work, I prefer not to have my face on anything that is seen by the public, Miranda said. She sounded tired, but her reply was good-natured. Thank you for the offer, but I'll have to pass. Ah, that's no problem. We just put a helmet on you and have the plinth say unnamed coalition soldier. We maybe even make some changes to body type. He grinned. This was happening, one way or another. Miranda didn't reply but put her hand to her helmet again. Shepard, Lawson, the ship's core is going critical. Saren will die in the blast, abort your current objective and get to the nearest airlock. There was a pause. Shepard? Respond. Shepard. All of Rex's pride at their recent victory died away. The horrible feeling in his gut was back in force. XXXXX. The Presidium was a cacophony of noise. The bangs of weapons, the inhuman roars of Saren's forces crawling up from the elevator shafts, bellows of defiance from the defenders, and heavy thunks from bodies hitting the ground. Jessica Kane struggled to not let it overwhelm her as danced in and out of the ranks of the enemy forces, her power armor and tactical cloak being the only reasons that she wasn't instantly cut to shreds. The sheer volume of fire from the Geth, collectors, and cyborgs meant that, even without her being directly targeted, shots would still hit her as she darted in, stabbed 2 or 3 of the approaching soldiers in vital areas, and dashed out. It was a tricky game that she was playing, but not one without its rewards. She was slowly building up a steady pile of kills, aided by the fact that her blades were slow enough to slip through kinetic barriers. Within minutes of the breach into the Presidium, she had managed to get her kill count well into the dozens, the massing horde not willing to dedicate enough attention away from her frontal assault to focus to a single hunter-killer. But even then, there was only so much that she could do. The flow of Saren's forces that were pouring out of the breach where the elevators had once been was nothing short of overwhelming. Advanced weapons fired in a disorganized chorus, crashing down like a tidal wave on the defenses that had been erected by the Allied defenders. A string of dead defenders already lay along the first line of barricades that had been set up, to the point where much of the front line had been abandoned. With the exception of a few stranded, everyone else had fallen back to the second layer of defenses, the enemy mob slowly advancing as a result. Jessica slipped forward, her body practically doubled over in an attempt to minimize her frame and thus giving her enemies a smaller target. The HUD within her cybernetic eyes sent up warnings as she took shots, thin red lines tracing them to their origin, but she ignored it. This program was excellent for urban combat but rather redundant in a cramped environment like this. Taking massive strides, she jutted her legs out in front of her and let herself slide on the ground, well below the torrent of fire above of her. Swinging both of her knives, she sliced outward with both hands. She caught the leg of a collector with each knife, her power armor and augmentations ensuring full penetration. Silently, with the exception of a few insect-like chirps, the collectors fell to the ground, each of them missing a leg from the shin down. Rising to one knee, Jessica flipped her knives into a reverse grip position and stabbed down. Each knife was driven into a collector throat, followed up by a quick and vicious swipe. Both throats were torn wide open, so much so that both of them hung off to the side, barely attached to the rest of their body. She had earned 2 more kills. But her window had closed now. Even if the hostiles around her couldn't see her directly, they could see that 2 collectors had suffered near full decapitations, as well as the yellow blood that coated her knives. Sheathing her knives, Jessica retreated back to the relative safety of the barricades, drawing her SMGs and blind firing behind her as she went. There was a strangled gurgle behind her, and she was fairly certain she had gotten at least one, but she had no time to check. Too many shots to count were pinging the back of her shields, the percentage counter that marked their strength rapidly spinning downwards as her tactical cloak collapsed under the strain. It was at 30% when she reached the barricades, vaulting over and ducking down behind them. She was safe for the moment. The second her shields charged, though, she was heading straight back out there. Adam, got any more power cells? Jessica craned her neck. The frontline defenders were mainly those with power armor, Coalition, Enclave, and Solarian, and a fair few metahumans and Geth Primes. They were blasting away at the incoming hostiles with the heaviest weapons that their armies could field, rocket launchers, laser and plasma rifles. Even the Solarian prototypes were putting up an impressive showing, Theta energy weapons for the Coalition, Fatman for both the Coalition and Enclave, and the Solarians were utilizing some sort of pistol-shaped grenade launcher. Among the behemoths of steel and muscle, however, she spotted Cornelia and Adam crouched right next to her, the ground around them littered with spent power cells. 2, the elderly man said sadly. 1 for each of us. He tossed her a small, glowing cube at her, the Reman skirmisher catching it and sliding it into her rigid, silver rifle. Adam did the same with his much thicker weapon. Stay safe, he said. He grimaced. I'm starting to wish we had hung onto our old weapons. Keep an eye out for any fallen rifles, we'll need to switch when these ones run dry. I'll get you a couple, Jessica said. Both heads jerked back in her direction, but she was already gone. Her shields had recovered, her cloak reactivated, and she was back up over the barricade. She darted to the abandoned first line and grabbed a pair of Turian-made rifles from an area where CSEC had made a valiant stand before being overwhelmed. The pile of bodies was mainly Turian, but other aliens were mixed in with the mess, along with a few humans, Necro, and Meta, along with Standard. For half a second, she was reminded of New Washington Stadium and the slaughter that Admiral Crawford had ordered. Both felt equally pointless. A trio of the smaller cyborgs, the thin, unarmed ones, suddenly clambered over the abandoned barricade of the first line. Shifting her salvaged rifles to one hand, she drew a knife and made quick work of the lightly armored abominations. Quick slashes to the throat were all that was needed. All 3 of them fell to the ground, 2 lifeless while the third made weak, groaning noises, ineffectually reaching up at Jessica. Once again, she was no longer incognito, this time not helped by the floating rifles. There was a deafening roar that somehow broke through the maelstrom of noise, and Jessica's heart dropped. One of the cyborgs, one with a Turian head planted on a massive body with viciously long claws, was charging directly at her. Still, despite her inner terror, her years of conditioning carried her body forward to the point where it was almost like it was on autopilot. She ducked a swipe that would have taken her head off, swinging up with her knife as she did and catching the giant in the wrist. Unlike with the collectors, the mass here was too thick for a clean cut, and she only got halfway through before the knife hit something hard, lodging itself there. Before she could attempt to pull it out, the beast roared and shifted its whole body, swinging at her with the other claw. Her body shifted to dodge and only mostly succeeded. 2 claws tore into the back of her power armor as she ran back to the safety of cover, skimming her back and drawing blood. She hissed. It was a light injury, but it had only been a glancing blow. A direct hit would produce who knew how much damage. Her body went into full fight or flight mode, her legs stretching to lengths that she hadn't even known were possible, each bound taking her closer to cover. The part Turian behemoth was right behind her, its heavy footfalls causing the ground to quake, and Jessica had a very nasty feeling that it was keeping up with her without any issue. Her prospects weren't looking very good. If she stopped to fight it, she could potentially beat it, but she would be exposing herself to fire from the main enemy force, while if she didn't stop to fight it, it would eventually catch her and rip her to shreds. Once again, she drew and blind fired her SMG behind her, the loud thumps making it nearly impossible to miss the giant thing, but there was no indication that she was even slowing it down. As she neared the second line, both Adam and Cornelia popped up, their weapons aimed directly at the thing behind her. Duck. At once, Jessica dropped into a slide once more, skidding along the floor as blurs of pure white energy arched overhead. There was a deafening explosion and a flash of white right behind her, and she heard a loud thud from something heavy hitting the floor. Coming to a stop right in front of the barricade, she hoisted herself up over, passing her looted rifles to the Coalition soldiers. Much appreciated, but eyes up front. We got incoming. Cornelia said, taking both rifles and handing one to Adam. She was right. Saren's forces were surging together as a whole, heading straight for the second line. Drawing her second SMG, Jessica didn't attempt to make another surgical strike, she just opened fire. Adam and Cornelia joined her and the rest of the defenders by emptying the last power cells of their Theta energy weapons, before switching to their new rifles. Between the countless arcs of energy, the occasional heavy explosion, and standard gunfire from mounted machine guns, the enemy offensive was faltered for a moment. At that moment in time, it looked like they may stall out and break under the pressure. But then the fire from the defenders faltered. Munitions among the frontline defenders were being strained to the breaking point, not helped by how little notice they had all had when setting up these defenses, and the fire from energy weapons was starting to lessen. The need to stop and reload, combined with the slowly diminishing supply of power cells, was catching up with the defenders. And it gave the Geth, collectors, and cyborgs just enough space to push forward and finally reach the barricade. They smashed into the barricades, literally in the case of the larger cyborgs and heretic Geth Primes. Panicked yells echoed from all across the second line, firing their weapons at point-blank range, even as they were swarmed from all sides. And the bodies began to fall. At this range, with many of the lighter hostile forces leaping over the barricades, the defenders had lost their cover. Dozens of them died within minutes. The powerful and advanced weapons of the attackers were tearing through shields and armor with ease. Already, the second line was starting to collapse. No, no! Cornelia shouted. Firing her rifle with one hand, she drew her sword with another and swung at a Geth that had tried to clear the barricade, taking its head clear off. We're running out space. Adam, we gotta move. Fiddling with her belt, she awkwardly fingered the grenades at her side before chucking them over the barricade, not taking any heed of where they went before she turned and ran, Adam right behind her after he tossed his own grenades. Jessica was right beside them. Thankfully, the trick with the grenades seemed to have bought them a precious few seconds, as the resulting explosion, nearly swallowed up by the sounds of battle, ensured there were no pursuers hot on their heels. The three of them were able to reach the third line of defense without harassment. Sliding over the top, Cornelia and Adam instantly took cover behind the barricades and began to fire their new rifles, twin flares of automatic fire doing what they could. But that was only so much. With two lines of defense abandoned, as the last remnants of the second line were being engulfed, the enemy mass was only growing larger. No defender fire was reaching the breach the invaders had made, allowing more and more soldiers to pour out of it. They were in danger of being overwhelmed through pure numbers. Major, light them up! A cannon thundered to Jessica's left and a blinding green explosion tore through the front of the enemy throng. It blew a good chunk in the enemy formation, sending scorched body parts flying, but the gap was filled in within seconds. Jessica took a quick look to her left. Two soldiers in Enclave power armor were to her left, and she recognized both of them. Cadence Moore had her super sledge at the ready with one hand and was firing a shotgun with her other. Directly to her left was another Enclave Special Forces operative, one with the XI symbol and a white number 1 on her arm. Jessica had never met her, but she had been briefed on all Enclave Special Forces squads when she had been part of it. Major Makoto. The Major was heavily armed, with a recoilless rifle on one shoulder, a heavy plasma cannon on the other, a Gatling gun on each forearm and an underslung shotgun directly opposite them. A claw from Major Makoto's backpack produced another shell and loaded it into her cannon, whereupon it thundered again. For the smallest of moments, Jessica wanted to attack the two of them, to take her knife to their throats. The two of them, Cadence, in particular, were pawns of Woods. They had stood by while Goeth had played his games with her and her sisters, doing nothing. Cadence had been right there when Warren Black, mad dog that he was, had picked fights with Grace. As soon as the anger had started, she strangled it. She would figure all of that out later. If she would bury the hatchet or slit Cadence's jugular while she slept, she would figure it out after the battle was over. At the moment, Major Makoto was one of the heaviest concentrations of firepower that they had left. It had taken her a moment to realize, but quite a few of their heavy hitters had been in the second line. She didn't see that many who had made it to the third line. Some had. She could see that the Solarian STG in power armor had made it almost fully intact, but there were notably less Coalition and Enclave power armored forces. Likewise, there were only a handful of Geth Primes left. Their frames no doubt were ill-suited for retreating. And now they were gone, even though they were running out of room. There was only one line of defense left after this, the very top of the stairs leading up to the Presidium. If that one broke, half of the major leaders of the galaxy would be left defenseless. Saren would get his way. Again. Once again, Jessica's SMGs roared to life. "You two, help me please," she said, looking at Cornelia and Adam. That earned her a couple of confused looks, until she gestured her head at Major Makoto, shifting in her direction. Thankfully, they understood what she had been communicating. They needed to keep the Major alive and her heavy kit firing. The pair of them bunched up near her, their rifles firing every step of the way. Cadance's head jerked at them as they neared, but if she recognized them or had any words for them, she kept it to herself. The next second, her attention was back to the front, her scavenged shotgun blaring. "How many damn lackeys does Saren have?" Cornelia shouted in frustration, throwing up one hand and conjuring up a biotic barrier for the five of them. At once, a barrage of projectiles began to hit it, but it gave them a small opening. Enough for Major Makoto to fire a plasma shell into the midst of a dozen collectors, sending all of them flying in much smaller bits. Those ships can only carry so many troopers, right? Shouldn't he be running out? His fleet has largest ships we've ever seen in numbers large enough to launch the start of a planetary invasion, Adam replied, his rifle firing to the point where it overheated, forcing him to drop it and draw a pistol that he started to fire. "This isn't a strike force, we're fighting an entire army right here." Jessica was starting to feel that he was right. The numbers that had been pouring into the Presidium had never faltered, not even for a second. It didn't matter how many of them died in a suicidal charge against the well-entrenched Allied forces, more would just come to replace them. Meanwhile, the defenders were faltering against the ever-increasing volume of firepower, a soldier dying here and there with increasing frequency. They were losing this fight. I am not dying here. Cadence roared definitely. A heretic Geth Prime had chosen to simply press through Cornelia's already faltering batter and was now aiming its machine gun at Makoto. As a response, Cadence swung her super sledge right into the synthetic's gut. The impact was so strong that it nearly fully inverted the Geth's torso, it was so thoroughly crumpled. It tumbled to the ground, half hanging over the barricade, still trying to raise its weapons with the painless determination that only a synth could manage. A second swing from Cadence crushed its head flat. Give me that! Cornelia shouted, dropping her Turian rifle and grabbing the Prime's weapon. With some difficulty, she heaved it up, propped it up on the barricade, a gap, and let out a furious volley of automatic fire. A handful of Geth troopers were gunned down within a matter of seconds, their bodies clattering to the floor. But the gap made by this, like so many other gaps that had been opened, was filled in by the constantly surging lines of Saren's forces. There was no end to them. Again, Major Makoto's cannon flashed, and a swarm of body parts was sent flying into the air. This time though, it took longer for the gaps to be filled. Jessica blinked, unsure what had changed. Then it hit her. Hundreds, maybe even 1,000, of Saren's forces had died in this reckless charge towards the Presidium. Their bodies hadn't gone anywhere. They lay strewn on the ground, clogging the floor of the Presidium, piling up on each other and quickly starting to form walls of dead. There was no tactical element to the enemy advance, just a blind rush, which added further to the dead. And now, there were so many dead, that the ones who had come after were being forced to wade knee-deep through them. Saren's reckless assault was choking on its own weight. The other defenders were starting to realize this too. The sheer volume of enemies coming out of the breach hadn't lessened, but its speed had. It had slowed considerably. The front line of Saren's forces being forced to clamber over piles of their own fallen, to move, which slowed down those behind them and those who were still coming up. The hail of fire coming from the mob had lessened, due to the congested battlefields and limited movements robbing many of them of clear lines of sight. They're stalling out. A voice roared over the comm lines. They're about to break. Hit them hard, scatter them. That was not at all what was happening, more than likely not a single aspect of Saren's force was capable of breaking formation without orders, but Jessica didn't complain. A roar of triumph went up around the surviving defenders, the faltering assault was giving them hope. Major, focus on their heavy hitters. Cadence barked, swinging her hammer and taking the head off of a collector. Towards the back. Suffocate them with their own dead. Instead of responding, Makoto arced her cannon upward, firing towards the very back of the horde, catching a pack of primes. Jessica couldn't see the damage that was being done towards the back, but she did notice quite a few tracer rounds being fired in that direction. Taking the briefest of moments after putting a round through the head of a Turian cyborg, she glanced at the battlefield behind her. Roger, Cheryl, and Nora were on the opposite side of their defenses, their weapons noticeably aiming towards the rear of the enemy mob, Roger having switched to his palm-mounted plasma cannon. Near the middle, Fox was firing his Gatling laser non-stop and had his mouth open in a roar that was inaudible over the noise. Karen and Ashley on either side of him, Ashley firing a strange blue rifle while Karen chucked grenades that produced blinding explosions that surpassed even the force of plasma shells. Up in the final line of defense, Lyra was maintaining a biotic barrier, alternating between shifting it to keep up with heavier pockets of fire and firing off the occasional orb of biotic energy. Gurus was alongside her, taking advantage of the protection the barrier provided. His sniper rifle was firing once a second, constantly shifting to adjust for new targets and to avoid incoming fire. There was a faint shimmer in the air behind them, and Jessica was fairly certain that Kazumi was doing some behind-the-scenes sabotage that she wouldn't appreciate until the battle was over. She turned her attention back. There was no denying it now, the number of enemy fighters had been drastically reduced. Near the breach, Jessica spotted a thicket of them attempting to press through the ocean of bodies that had piled up, only to make barely any progress. They had turned their own entrance into a choke point with their suicidal tactics, and it was only getting tighter. Struck by a daring inspiration, Jessica activated her cloak, switched to her knives, and dashed out into the open. The battlefield was nowhere near as thick with gunfire as it had once been. The reduced number of defenders, as well as the decreased reinforcement stream, meant that only a fraction as many weapons were being fired, and it helped her immensely. She was able to dart through enemy territory, not wading through the bodies but carefully leaping from one of the larger ones to another, without her cloak being dropped. Eventually, she was able to circle around to behind the breach, where a handful of collectors and Geth were attempting to force their way through while standing on one of the few patches that wasn't strangled with bodies. Jumping into the thick of it from behind, her knives swung through the air, striking at necks and whatever other vital areas that she could reach. Within seconds, half a dozen bodies had joined the ever-growing mass all around her, but she didn't stop there. Driving her knives into two of the collectors, she dragged them towards the breach, just as more cyborgs were clambering out of it. With a heave, she forced the collectors into the hole and ripped her knives out, sending them flying. Smacking right into the cyborgs, they were knocked loose and all of them tumbled back the way they had come, many thuds and clangs from down below promising that they had hit quite a few attackers on the way up. With that down, she slipped out and started to head back towards the defenses. Things were in a better situation now, but they weren't perfect. The battlefield was now so clogged that Saren's forces could only get a handful through at a time, but their reserves were showing no sign of becoming depleted. The defenders would be able to hold out for now, but they would slowly be chipped away at until the assault finally stopped. It would take time. They were in a position where they could hold out, but someone would have to cut off Saren's army at its core before it was too late. XXXXX. Jane felt like she was on autopilot as she followed EDI's directions through the winding warship towards the bridge. Even with the heavy footfalls of her power armor and the winding passage that she was being forced to take, she was only encountering the occasional patrol. Similar circumstances were being encountered by Rex and Miranda. Saren had deployed or was in the process of deploying all of his ground forces onto the citadel. Like so much up until now, Jane was aware of this, was processing it the way she would any information, but it was only surface level. The core of her mind was dedicated to one thought and one thought alone. She had to kill Saren. She was silent for the majority of her journey, only breaking it with brief confirmations of EDI's commands, a right here, a left there, a ladder in one place, but the AI was speaking far more than she was. It went on like this for some time, minutes ticking by with nothing breaking it up aside from the moments where Jane had to stay still to lead one of the few patrols that were present pass by. And then, after a good long while, she found herself in front of a blast door that was particularly thick. She stopped in front of it, checking her plasma rifle one last time. EDI, open the door. Opening, EDI said. There was a moment of hesitation. I appear to have encountered a problem. The security on this door is far more advanced than the rest of the ship. It appears that Saren added many personal upgrades to it. I am attempting to bypass, but it may take some time. Jane didn't respond, she merely rooted herself to the spot and waited for EDI to do her job. The synthetic spoke again. Captain, progress here is slow. Rex and Miranda have already reached the engine room and will have sabotaged it within minutes. I advise that you abandon your attempt to assassinate Saren and locate the nearest airlock. The odds of him escaping in such a small window are astronomically low. Those are odds I'm not willing to play with, EDI, Jane said simply, her voice stony. It was odd. When she had been in the Presidium during the talks of all of the major powers, she had barely processed it. Everything she had heard back then had been filtered through a fog, only the bare essentials making its way to her brain. And in many ways, that fog had not lifted. Even if she wanted to, she couldn't bring herself to think about the complex nuances of galactic politics and the fragile balance the galaxy was maintaining right now. But when it came to Saren, the fog had left an opening. She was already considering every possible situation that she might be walking into. Saren being caught totally unawares was unlikely, the same went for him being alone. Odds are there would be some form of security in there with him, guards or turrets. There was a better than average chance that whatever it was would try and flank her when she entered, she would have to check the corners. There was also the possibility that Saren was mad enough to rig his bridge up with bombs in order to be kept from being taken alive. Not the most probable outcome, but with Saren, it was hard to tell, his actions had not been predictable for some time now. Her line of thought was broken when a voice echoed around her. So. After all this time, you and I finally meet. It's a bit ironic, you've been chasing me ever since Eden Prime, and this is the first time we've actually ever talked. She knew this voice, Saren's voice. EDI, can you trace where this is coming from? Jane whispered. There was the possibility that Saren was talking to keep her in one place while he made an escape attempt. She wasn't going to have a repeat of Dr. Goeth. Saren was dying today, and within the hour at that. It's coming from the bridge, EDI said. It isn't being relayed through the bridge either, there are no other signals coming in or out of that room. He's in there. Captain, I strongly urge that you locate the nearest airlock. If he is on the bridge, his escape options are highly limited. He will not survive the destruction of this ship, and even if he did he would not be able to escape the fleet outside. Shepard ignored her. She focused instead on Saren. Something had broken through the blanket that had been smothering her for the better part of a month. Red, boiling anger. She was talking to Saren. The man who had been responsible for the deaths of millions of people across the galaxy, and had planned to kill countless more. He had arranged the massacres of Eden Prime, had hired mercenaries to glass a planet for a single hostage, had attempted to use both the Rachni and the Krogan as pawns, had attempted to empower President Woods into using the Geth as a slave army against the Coalition, had killed millions on the Citadel, and had plunged the Council and the Coalition into the first fully galactic war since the Krogan rebellions. That plan of yours didn't exactly pan out, did it? Jane asked scathingly. No matter how many plans you threw at the wall, my crew and I were one step behind you every step of the way, stopping you. You didn't get Lyra, you didn't get your Rachni army, you didn't get your Geth army, and you didn't get your Krogan army. And then we brought the war that you started to a grinding halt because we managed to get the galaxy to hate you more than it hated us. For someone who's dedicated their entire life to limiting the growth of my species, you're not particularly good at it. The problem was simple, I was relying on others too much, others who lacked my drive, Saren responded hotly. Jane's fingers twitched in anger. The door needed to open, it needed to open now. Things have been working far better ever since I took matters into my own hands. When I was passive, all of my plans ended in disastrous failures. Greedy, incompetent, and insane third parties tore down everything that I had been working towards, not understanding the greater picture. They were only interested in themselves. Even the supposed leaders of the galaxy failed to truly commit. Still, they did do something of worth. I thought the problem plaguing the galaxy was your kind, but the Council's inability to react was the true disease. You were a symptom. It all needs to be wiped away, we need a clean slate. Shut up, Shepard hissed. You're not some grand visionary. Your brother got killed in the First Contact War and you want revenge, that's all there is to you. And now that you're not going to get your revenge on the Coalition, you're taking out your frustration on everyone else who refused to play along with you. This whole mess has been nothing short of the galaxy's biggest temper tantrum. Because let me tell you something, she continued. I know exactly what it feels like to lose a brother. Mine died on Tuchanka, saving everyone else from the Reaper you sent. I'm pretty sure our mother blames me for letting him die, and I've accepted that. I know how much it burns you up inside and how you just need to do something to make it go away. She was stretching the truth there, but not lying. There was indeed a fire in her chest, one that had started the moment she had heard Saren's voice. It pushed away the fog that had been clouding her, and anger as she had never felt before coursed through her. The door needed to be open right now, every second Saren drew breath was a second too much. But you've probably noticed that I haven't started a terrorist campaign against the Turian hierarchy, haven't you? Because my brain is wired properly and I don't associate what you did with Turians or the Council. I actually know how to process grief. I'm not going to take out my frustrations on the galaxy as a whole. Just you. She wanted to slam her fist on the door, even though she knew that Reaper alloy would doubtlessly be unscratched by her power armor. Why was Saren still alive after all this time? Why was he still talking? The difference between you and I is that you and your kind are pathetically short-sighted, you always have been, Saren said. Even if by some miracle you managed to succeed in killing me, I will have already accomplished my goals. The full extent of your carelessness has been exposed to the galaxy as a whole, enough for the member species of the Council to bypass the Council itself and declare war on you directly. That will not just go away, particularly when those who called for a ceasefire are gone. Your kind is exposed for the galaxy to see, once but before he could finish, the door opened. At once, Jane's plasma rifle snapped up and fired, arcs of green energy streaking through the doorway and into the bridge. Saren, to her surprise, had been standing at the far end with his back to her, bending over a series of consoles, none of them Reaper in nature. The moment the door opened however, he threw himself over the terminals and out of Jane's sight, the plasma bolts tearing into the computers he had abandoned. Sparks flew as screens cracked and melted, half of Saren's computer array being destroyed by the barrage, but there was no cry of pain from Saren. Jane stopped to eject her spent microfusion cell and Saren took the opportunity to rise up and return fire, assault rifle rounds pinging off of her shields. Growing, Jane ducked out of the bridge and to the side, loading a fresh power cell into her weapon. Ashley Williams, Fox, and Karen. Saren roared from within the bridge. They're the ones I'm going to kill after I'm done with you. He didn't say why those people in particular were the ones he was going to kill, but Jane didn't have to imagine very hard. Saren had only proven her right, whether he could appreciate that or not. Waiting until her shields had fully recharged, Jane abandoned caution. Turning the corner, she stormed into the bridge, rifle in front of her, firing non-stop as she made a beeline to where Saren was taking cover. A warning on her helmet's HUD warned her that her shields were being rapidly depleted, but she ignored it. She would reach Saren's cover long before that would happen, and the armor beneath was too thick for instantaneous penetration anyway. Saren seemed to realize this, as when she was halfway to him, quite a few of her plasma bolts coming quite close to his head, he abandoned his cover. Leaping up over the line of ruined terminals, bright purple energy glowed around him and his entire body shot forward. Jane realized a moment too late what was happening. The Turian's armor was much lighter than hers, and under normal circumstances, he would not have been enough to move her more than an inch. With biotic energy coursing around him however, he was able to slam directly into her chest and send her wheeling over backward, falling down with her. The world was flipped as Jane fell, her plasma rifle spinning out of her hand, and there was a loud clang as she hit the ground. The next thing she saw was Saren's face, his eyes glowing with Reaper cybernetics, mere inches away from her own. Both of his arms dived, talons bared, and aiming directly for her throat. Instinctively, she rolled to the side, grabbing Saren by the waist as she did. With a single, utterly graceless movement, she was able to roll the alien along with her, interrupting him and pinning him beneath the bulk of her armor. The hatred in her reaching a boiling point, she drew Valkyr's Theta energy pistol from her side and aimed it at Saren, her finger tightening around the trigger. Saren's synthetic hand darted up, still pulsing with biotic energy, and snapped shut around the weapon, crushing its barrel with ease. Shepard was taken aback at the ease with which the Exulan weapon had been destroyed, but only a small part of her. Saren released the weapon, baring his talons again, only to have the ruined husk of a weapon throw at him. Normally, such a thing would be a mere annoyance against a soldier in modern armor, but when thrown by someone in power armor at point-blank range, there was much more kinetic energy than normal. There was a loud snap and Saren howled in anger as one of his mandibles dangled off to the side, his body momentarily slack. Clasping her hands together, Jane raised them above her head and brought them smashing down onto Saren's chest. There was a deeply satisfying sound as the front of his armor caved in and another snap echoed across the bridge. Smiling in satisfaction, Jane lifted her hands up to repeat what she had done, only for Saren to let out a roar of rage. Flailing wildly, a biotically augmented fist caught her in the head from the side. The firmness of her helmet kept any major damage from happening, but her head was still swimming from the force of the impact. What was more, it had just enough force behind it to lift her off the ground for a second, with her crashing back down to the floor and skidding for a second. Dizziness and nausea building up inside of her in equal measure, Jane stood up. Saren was already on top of her, his rifle having been dropped long ago, his talon diving right for her neck. She lunged to the side, but not enough for him to completely miss her. His cybernetic arm tore into her throat from the side, his slow-moving arm passing through her kinetic barriers and catching her in one of the few weak points of her armor. Blinding pain erupted from the wound, bright red blood pouring down her side and something unpleasantly loose scraping against her lower throat. Again, Saren darted forward with his talons, looking to end the fight. Deciding to not bother to try and dodge him again, Jane let him make his strike, standing firm. It made his movements much easier to anticipate, as well as gave her a clear look at which angle he was coming from. This turned out to be from the front. As he extended his arm, her armored hand darted out and seized it by the wrist. Robbing it of all momentum, she pulled it forward, dragging Saren towards her, and slamming her free fist into his gut. The Turian doubled over in pain, his free hand covering where Jane had just punched him, which wasn't that far from the dent she had made earlier. At that moment, the anger that had been burning inside of Jane became too much to bear and something inside of her snapped. She let go of Saren's hand, only to shift upward and grab him by the head. Letting out a roar of anger from deep within her gut, she heaved and swung down into the row of half-melted computers. Saren's face was forced into whatever few screens hadn't been damaged, all of them splintering as Jane brought Saren's face down over and over again. Blue blood poured down Saren's face from all the massive cuts that were opening on his face twisted into a combination of pain and fury. As Jane pulled back again for another swing, biotic energy enveloped them both. When Jane moved to swing Saren down again, she lost her footing and began to float upward, completely weightlessly, Saren with her. "I assume the Coalition never trained you for zero-G combat," Saren said scathingly. As he did, he gripped the hand holding him and dove his talons into the gaps in the armor yet again. Roaring in pain, Jane's grip slackened, and Saren broke free of her grasp. He spun in the air, pushing off of her body to do so, and moved to again go for her throat, only for a gasp of pain to escape his mouth and his entire body to recoil. Whatever was torturing him inside, it was enough to cause the biotic energy that was keeping them both up to vanish, causing both of them to tumble to the ground. Saren struggled to get back to his feet, but let out another gasp of pain and hesitated. Jane did not. She was on him within seconds, both hands clasping firmly around his throat, even as her injured arm throbbed with pain. For a moment, their eyes locked. Even with his eyes replaced by artificial replacements, Jane could see nothing but hatred and loathing looking back at her. Then she squeezed. Saren's throat collapsed under her grip, crumbling with little resistance as her augmented strength proved to be too much for it. The anger in Saren vanished to be replaced with frantic desperation. He thrashed against Jane's iron-clad grip, scratching fruitlessly against her armored knuckles, trying to get her off in a desperate last-ditch effort. There was a horrific gurgling as he struggled, and Jane could feel something wet leaking onto her hands. Then, he went very still. After keeping her hands locked around him for another minute, Jane took a step back. There was no mistaking it. Saren was dead. "I did it," she said breathlessly, putting her hand to her comm unit. "Excellent," EDI said, faster than usual. "Miranda and Rex have initiated an overload in the core. I will direct you to your escape route, but you must move quickly, there isn't much time." Jane nodded, more out of habit than anything, and took a step towards the door. Then she stopped, looking back at Saren. The hatred in his eyes had been the same hatred that had coursed through the citizens of the citadel as they had lashed out at any coalition citizens that they could find. The same hatred that would rise up again the second the galaxy recovered from the trauma of an attack on the citadel. A hatred that she would be at the center of. Everything that had happened since Tuchanka came crashing down on her as she stood there and pondered it all. The deaths of Jenkins and Sam, the attacks on Cheryl and Folker, with Cheryl nearly being raped and abducted, the assassination of Philo, Adek being turned into a puppet state and all the atrocities that had been committed there, countless innocents being killed on Tylev, the Yogg being weaponized, and the citadel shattered. And John dying. And it would all get worse when they came for her. But then Jane did something that surprised herself. She smiled. It was curious that she hadn't seen it before. The solution to all of this was rather obvious, wasn't it? She didn't know what she hadn't considered it before, but now it was as plain as day. I'm going to make this better, I'm going to make this better, she whispered to herself. Slowly, she sat down. Captain, I need you to move, now. Edi said over her comm line, clearly starting to panic. The Reaper core is reaching critical levels, we can't cut this any closer. I'm sorry, I can't make it, Jane said simply. I can't move, he got me worse than I thought. I've got a bum leg. It was almost beautiful in its simplicity. Shepard, I'm not reading any major spikes in your life signs, Edi said. Whatever it is, it doesn't appear to be major. Please, you need to start moving now. The A.I.S voice was becoming louder and more desperate. Jane smiled. Edi was smart, she would understand in the long run. I'm sorry Edi, I can't make it, she said. It hurt. This hurt a lot. But at the same time, it was relieving. She could breathe freely again. Tell the crew that I'm proud of them. They did everything that was expected of them and more. Tell them to live long, healthy, happy lives. A tear rolled down her face. It was all going to be better after this. No, 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 no. Edi said, her voice desperate. It hurt Jane to hear Edi upset like this, but she had made up her mind. She had to do this. Jeff. Talk to her. Please. Another voice crackled to life over the comm lines. Shepard, Joker said. He sounded as if he was going to start crying at any second. Please don't do this. Jane didn't respond. I'm going to make this better. I'm going to make this better. She closed her eyes. She was fairly certain she could hear the thump of the core overloading beneath her. She felt happy and free for the first time in a long time. XXXXX. Okay Hurst, that was the last slug, Riggs said somberly from his side of the controls on Sarah. That was my dying wish, we contributed as much as we could, what's the plan now? Hurst took a moment before he replied. Both sides were down to a fraction of their former fighting strength, with a dozen Reapers being all that was left of the attacking fleet, while 150-odd defenders fired everything they had left at them. It could still go either way. Hurst? We need to either do something or get out of the way. Yeah, I've got something for them. We ram them, he said. Get the ship as fast as we can without jumping to light speed, and smash it into one of the Reapers while overloading the core. We drag one of them down with us. He looked over at his robot companion. Normally, this would be the time that Rig would start to cuss him out. This time though, he merely lowered his optics. Okay, I'll see if I can pull that off. I'll pilot the ship, you get to the escape pods the second the core is set to overload, Hurst said. Oh fuck you. If we're dying together, Rig said. Hurst felt something tug in his heart. He loved that bucket of bolts like a brother. This is going to take some jury-rigging but, wait, hold up. Hurst, look. His attention snapped back to the display. A massive explosion had just torn through the center of the Reaper fleet, fire engulfing one of the largest ships before spreading outward, engulfing several nearby ships. When it clear, half of the remaining Reapers had been destroyed, and quite a few of the survivors had been badly damaged. All combat-capable craft. A female voice barked over the comm lines. Full speed ahead, close to knife fight range. And this before any of them could escape. Hurst let out a whoop of laughter, one in which Rig quickly joined. Yes, yes, yes. He roared. Take that Saren. You lose. Feeling nothing short of ecstatic, he pushed the engines to full power, sending Sarah speeding towards the citadel. Wait, what are you doing? Rig asked. They said combat capable, we don't have anything left that can hurt them. Oh, we're not heading to the Reapers, Hurst said, adjusting the ship's course to take it well around the battle, which was quickly wrapping up as the disorganized and damaged Reapers were bombarded by 100 different ships. But there's still plenty of hostile forces on the citadel. And Guardian lasers may not do that much against dropships, but against ground forces, they'll do quite a bit. That actually makes a lot of sense, Rig said, clearly surprised. We contribute in a meaningful well, okay. Carry on. Hurst nodded as Sarah sped past the dwindling Reaper forces, heading through the gap in the citadel and coming to a stop. This is Franklin Hurst, captain of the privateer ship Sarah, he said, pressing a button so that his voice was broadcast on local channels. We are here to lend fire support, where is it needed? We lost control of the entrance to the Presidium. An unknown voice said. We have forces up top that are holding on, but they're cut off. We need bombardments on the forces advancing upward. Copy that, moving into position, Hurst said, his fingers flying across Sarah's controls and managing thrusters that were adjusting Sarah into a more ideal position. The ship was now facing the Presidium. Magnifying the view on his holographic display, Hurst focused on the base of the tower that acted as the seat of the Council. Sure enough, countless heat signatures were climbing upward, none of the identifying as friendly on his IFF. Rig, light them up. Rig was already acting. Lasers arched out at the base of the Presidium tower. Massive splotches of heat signatures would overwhelm the tiny dots that Hurst was reading, and then nothing would be left when it faded. For a few minutes, Rig laid down arrays of lasers onto Saren's ground forces, easily killing dozens with each shot. Eventually, the heat signatures simply stopped popping up near the Presidium. Okay, keep an eye out for any more, they could be massing nearby. Hurst ordered. Hold on, a ship just popped out of nowhere, it's moving into the citadel with us, Rig said. He looked up from the controls. It's the Normandy. Looks like they're moving in to help us out. Oh, are they? Hurst said slyly. He remembered his time with the Normandy above Faroes, as well as their pilot. Pressing a few command keys, he opened a channel to the Normandy. Hey there Junior, you kicked my hind fair and square last time, I'll give you that. Wanna have a turkey shoot and see if you can make it 2-4, but he broke off. There was a strangled sob on the other end. Son. He said uncertainly. Is everything okay over there? The joy that had been rushing through him died a quick death. Something was wrong here. Our captain, Joker said, his voice stiff. What happened? Hurst asked. He already knew before he heard the reply. It still tore him apart. XXXXX. Author's note, fun fact. Months of me thinking about how I wanted to write this chapter, and I only came up with the idea of a Yogg husk when I sat down and started writing it in early February. It was interesting to write a scene from Rex's perspective. He strikes me as the type of guy who would fight something twice his size and only be barely put out when his ribs were broken and embedded in his organs. Which ones just got punctured? Not important. Also, it probably showed a wee bit, but I had been on a Warframe kick when I wrote Jessica's scene. Didn't want to make her into a full tenno, but a little touch here and there I thought would be fun. 2 chapters left. But, well, it kind of goes without saying. This was the climax of From the Ashes. Everything after this will be falling action. Tying up loose ends and the like. As for Jane killing herself, this is something I've been planning for literally years. A bittersweet end to this story, the repercussions to which will be explored in the remaining 2 chapters. I don't know how I feel now that I finally got it on paper, but I stand by it. I'm deeply interested to what you think about it. Christ, my life has gone through so much ever since I started writing this story. I started writing it the year I graduated from high school, the year my friend left Massachusetts to go to college in Maryland. The day he left, he introduced me to a bunch of friends from the next town over so I wouldn't be lonely without him. He was my only friend at the time, and while I fell out of contact with some of those friends, a couple turned out to be utter cockholes. I'm still very close friends with the rest. Heck, one of them came over a week or so after my best friend had left and introduced me to Persona 4, which helped me a lot during my uncertain freshman years of college. I spent 4 years in college working on a degree in technical writing and journalism, graduated, had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, had an epiphany, got a job at my local high school, went back to school for my master's in education. Now I'm student teaching, and God willing I'll graduate and get my teaching license in the spring. And this whole time From the Ashes was a project I was working on, sometimes very sparsely, but it was always something I planned to see through to the end. It's kind of ironic that it's nearing its end as I plan to make a leap into the career I hope to spend the rest of my life on, one that will hopefully be able to support me. I don't know what point I'm trying to make, I just wanted to share this with all of you. Thank you for sticking with me through the ups and downs of my life, and thank you for being so patient. This story has 2 chapters left in it. I don't know how fast I'll get it up, but it will be finished. This story is a sloppy mess in a lot of ways, riddled with typos, more than I'll ever be able to get out without setting months of my life aside, and can basically be used as a graph to chart my growth as a writer, complete with a lot of my experimental phases. But I'm still fond of it, I'm glad I wrote it, and I want to see it through to the end. We're almost there, guys. 2 more chapters. I would like to thank my patrons, Superfeather Yoshi, Snanimihus, Raptorus Maximus, Davis Swinney, Mackenzie Buckle, Josue Garcia, Jonathan Eason, Ryan Van Schok, Chaos Spartan 575, and Caledon Vitas for their amazing support. Chapter 119. Broke in. XXXXX. The dead were beyond counting. Ashley had given up trying, partially because of the sheer variety of factors and partially because she simply didn't want to think about how much damage had been done in such a short time. Destroyed Allied ships, fallen Allied soldiers, civilians that had been slaughtered by Saren's forces, the destruction of one of the Citadel's arm. Grimly, she looked up. She could still see the lifeless arm that had once been home to millions of people, floating idly away from the rest of the Citadel. Even now, hundreds of rescue shuttles were diving into its depths, doing everything in their power to save the survivors who had managed to take shelter in sealed areas. The good news was that survivors were being pulled off. Not nearly enough though. There could never be enough survivors after something like this. There was no getting around the fact that today was going to go down in galactic history for all the wrong reasons. The day that the very heart of the galactic community was attacked by a madman and permanently damaged the symbol of that community's unity. Though, Ashley couldn't help but reflect that the Council's unity had taken quite a few serious hits ever since the war had started. Grimly, she wondered if this would be the death blow for it. The hierarchy and union had already blatantly ignored its wishes, the Council's inability to defend itself on top of that was a deadly combination. Unless Ashley was mistaken, the Citadel Council would never wield the same power again. Its reputation had been dragged through the mud ever since the war had started. All three of its member races had taken up different positions from it, the hierarchy and union declaring war and the Republic staying neutral while the Council had technically been allied with the coalition, and now this. Its influence had been tested and found sorely wanting. What this meant for the galaxy at large, Ashley had no idea. Truth be told, she wasn't thinking particularly hard about it, she had greater issues to worry about. More and more ships carrying relief supplies and personnel were docking at the Citadel every hour. Its placement at the center of the mass relays meant that the response to the damage caused by the attack could not be any more immediate. It wasn't just official humanitarian aid organizations that were responding, although around a dozen different ones had already arrived. Civilian ships were coming in with such force that they were clogging some of the passages towards the Citadel. Food, water, medical supplies, some of them even ferrying small doctors from private practices who were working pro bono. The entire battle, and the destruction it brought, had left Ashley in an overwhelming state of shocked numbness and exhaustion. But looking out into the Serpent Nebula and seeing thousands of ships, from shuttles to hulking freighters, rushing to help those in need on such short notice, caused a small spark of pride to break through the stupor clutching her. Coalition and Council ships were out there, coordinating without issue. Even a hefty portion of non-Council ships had arrived to assist, many without prompting. Tragedy, it seemed, could bring out the best in people all across the galaxy. It was a very small spark, however. As proud as she wanted to be at the galactic community right now, she couldn't. She had not slept in the past 24 hours, not that she was certain she could if she tried, having spent it patrolling the Citadel for any stragglers of Saren's forces and helping with survivors. For the last 24 hours she had been surrounded by the dead and dying, a first-hand experience of Saren's last, destructive act of spite. She had wanted to scream, cry, and hunt down every last one of Saren's slaves that were still crawling around the bowels of the Citadel, and all of it had crashed together. Now it felt like she was moving through a haze. Through some miracle, none of the Normandy crew had been seriously injured during the final battle, a rare departure from their normal fates. As such, and as a result of their record, they had all been assigned to patrol the lower wards for any survivors of Saren's forces. While the majority of them had been annihilated in their suicidal charges, a few hunter-killers were still lurking in the darker areas of the Citadel, still following their master's order to kill as many as possible. Even dead, Saren was still dragging souls down with him. They had been in the middle of their rounds when they had received a top-priority communication from Admiral Anderson. They were to report to a secure conference room he had specified on the Presidium, at once. Additional coalition units would move in to replace them on the cleanup campaign, they were needed for more pressing issues. Slowly, they had trickled in. It took some time, they had been spread out all over the Citadel in an attempt to put out the fires, but after an hour they were all there. Roger, Cheryl, Adam, Cornelia, Nora, Kazumi, Garis, Lyra, Rex, Joker, Edi, Karen, Fox, Joker, and Ashley herself. For some reason, Franklin Hurst and Rig were there as well. All of them were seated, minus Fox, around a large circular conference table. The majority of them looked like they were dead on their feet. Ashley suspected that they had not had any better luck with sleep than she had. Cheryl looked as if she was half leaning on Nora, even while sitting down. Cornelia looked more physically active, no doubt a benefit of her mechanical nature, but Ashley couldn't remember the last time she had seen the woman with eyes that read. She had always been the type to wear her emotions on her sleeve, after all. I understand you are all exhausted and overworked, so I would like to thank you for bearing with me. Admiral Hackett, who didn't look much better than the rest of them, was sitting at the head of the table, Admiral Anderson right behind him. I'll get right to the point. The Normandy and her crew have rendered an invaluable service to the coalition and the galactic community as a whole. Over these past few months, you and everyone else on that fine vessel have done more than most do in their entire military careers, and you've all been nominated for the coalition's highest honors. And considering both Anderson and I approve of that concept, it effectively means said honors will be issued as soon as the proper paperwork is filed. There was a scattered response of half nods and grunts of vague approval. Hackett would have needed to be blind to not notice, but he chose to not comment. I would also like to take this moment to extend my personal thanks to you and the sacrifices you've made. The pain that you've subjected yourself to and the burdens that you've bore were more than I could ever order you to. Ashley was certain she could see Cheryl clutching at her snow-white arm. Words cannot express my gratitude. This time he got a few smiles as a response. They're the finest bunch of lunatics I ever met, let me tell you that, Hurst said, banging his fist on the table in approval. Damn proud to have flown with them. Hackett nodded in agreement. This had actually gotten a strangled laugh out of Cornelia. Ashley herself almost smiled. However, it died on her face when she saw the way that Hackett was looking at Hurst. He was attempting to look amused, but it didn't reach his eyes. They looked regretful. Something stirred deep down in Ashley's gut. Nothing good was about to come. But, sadly, we must move on to more somber matters, he said. The fate of Jane Shepherd. At once, the faint warm feeling that had been building up in the room died. All eyes were on him. Cornelia sniffed. The Star of Terra is the very least we can give to her for what she did in stopping Sovereign, along with the Palladium Star and damn near anything else I can get to stick. I think I speak for everyone in this room when I say we all owe her our lives. Damn right, Gurus said, something that earned another round of nods, these ones much firmer. There is also the matter of her funeral, Hackett said. I have spoken upon it with Admiral Anderson. Since John Shepherd has yet to formally have his death honored, I felt that it would be fitting if we laid the twins to rest together. An old ache in Ashley burst back to life. She hated herself for thinking that way, but she had almost forgotten about John. Jane's death had completely driven it from her mind. Now, for the first time, the horrible truth dawned on her. They were both dead. She had known them since the three of them had been children, the brats of first contact war veterans. And now she would never see them again. Her breathing sharpened. There's also plans for memorials to honor all those who fell in the war and the build-up to it, Hackett said. And if there's any good news to come out of this, it's that we can safely say that the war is over. This isn't a ceasefire anymore, it's a true end to the conflict. Diplomats writing up the peace treaties have even started calling it the one-month war just to hammer it in. Between the attack on the Citadel and both sides of the fight making a stand together, public support for the war has dropped drastically. Combine that with your discovery about the Reapers, it was the 1-2 punch needed to make continuing the war harder than ending it. Everyone is just tired. And the fact that Shepherd is dead and therefore no longer a target probably had a lot to do with that, Gurus said, his voice filled with bitterness. Now that there isn't a scapegoat for the Rachni and the genophage. Ashley shared Gurus's resentment. It was a complicated set of conflicting feelings. True, she was glad that the war was over, that there weren't going to be more raids or moral quagmires like ADEK, but it maddened her to no end that Shepherd's death, her suicide, was one of the key components to it. And do they have anything over to say over the exact nature of her death? Don't tell me they put on some fake tears and talked about how tragic it was that she threw it all away? When they're the ones who probably pushed her there. Ashley couldn't remember ever hearing Gurus shout in all the time that she had known him. It was startling, to hear his normally calm and often deadpan voice twisted with anger. No one else appeared shocked, however. If anything, many of those present seemed to share his frustration. Rex was scowling, Lyra looked furious, and Nora appeared to be half a second away from trying to bend the table in half with her bare hands. Ashley opened her mouth. She was the highest-ranking member of the Normandy left alive. The ache in her throbbed again and it was up to her to maintain discipline. But that stopped when she saw Hackett win CE. A hole opened up in Ashley, a hole of pure darkness. She had no idea what it was or where it had come from. All she knew was that it was a horrible feeling that told her that the worst was yet to come. The circumstances around Jane Shepherd's death are nothing short of a tragedy, Hackett said. The fact that a soldier who did and gave so much felt the need to end her life in such a way is a blight on the coalition's armed forces. We failed her in more ways than I can count. And as much as it pains me to say this, I must ask you. Have any of you spoken of the true nature of her death? A heavy silence fell over the room. Many of those present had yet to speak yet, but there was a marked change in the room. Everyone was focusing on Hackett with undivided attention and razor-sharp focus. All signs of weariness had faded. What do you mean true nature? Lyra asked, sounding as if she didn't want to hear the answer. Hackett made a very tired sigh. I won't hide it from you anymore. The main reason you were all called here is that there are documents I require you to sign. Classified information non-disclosure agreements. Activating his Omni tool, Hackett pressed a few key commands. A dozen different chimes in the room went off, nearly everyone's Omni tools had burst to life. The only exceptions were with Lyra, Garrus, and Rex. Ashley quickly checked hers. A hologram of a legal document materialized in front of her, flickering in orange. What? Rex said, not even looking at one of his neighbor's copies. You want us to keep our traps shut? About what, exactly? We have been in talks with the council, Hackett said. Have you been to the upper wards of the Citadel lately? There are memorials being put up on near every level. Memorials to Jane Shepherd. They're calling her the savior of the Citadel. Not just Coalition, aliens too. Word of her death has spread like wildfire and public opinion on her has totally reversed. And? Ashley asked. The horrible feeling inside of her was growing to near unbearable levels. It was at a crossroads where she still didn't know what was coming, but it was close enough that she was starting to suspect. An uncomfortable and torturous minute passed in silence. The general public does not appear to be aware that the nature of Jane Shepherd's death was suicide, Hackett said. He wasn't making eye contact with any of them. People seem to be under the impression that she sacrificed herself intentionally to save the Citadel. She did, after all, die in the depths of an ancient, alien dreadnought just after personally killing Saren. You can understand how a conclusion like that would be drawn. You're not, Cornelia said, her red eyes blinking in disbelief. Please tell me you aren't doing what I think you're doing. She was begging Admiral Hackett. Ashley wanted to beg too, but she knew it wasn't going to stop what was coming. And then it finally did. The war is over, but interspecies relations are in a dangerously precarious place, Hackett said. His voice had sorrow in it, but it didn't waver. We don't have to worry about a united assault against the coalition, but smaller-scale conflicts could easily break out. The Batarian hegemony will doubtless seek to regain control of ADEK, the Solarian Union has shown its willingness to arm the Yogg, and tensions could easily spike again when the Krogan and Rachni populations grow to more substantial numbers. The impact of a hero, one who gave up her life to save the most diversely populated civilian center in the galaxy along with the leaders of most of the galaxy. That's something that can't be measured. And it's something we need right now. So. The coalition has decided to let the galaxy think that's what happened. The true nature of her death is to be of the highest classification, violation of which is chargeable by treason. Ashley looked around at the table. Rage was carved into the face of nearly everyone there. Karen and Fox had locked onto Hackett with cold, stony glares, Cornelia looked as if she was ready to start screaming, and Nora was shaking so badly that Ashley was legitimately concerned that she might attack the Admiral. Despite this, they all remained quiet. It seemed that none of them had managed to make it this far in their careers without learning to temper impulses that would lead to insubordination. And those of us who aren't coalition? Garrus asked sharply. The Spectres, politically connected, and heads of state? Where do we fall in? Can't help but notice that we didn't get anything. Ashley's eyes drifted onto the three aliens in the room. Now that she thought about it, what exactly could the coalition do in this situation? Hackett sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked exhausted. Odds were, he had gotten even less sleep than the rest of them. You are quite right. The legal authority the coalition has over the three of you is negligible. Any legal measures we would wish to impose on you would have to go through your respective governments. For you and Ms. T. Sony, those would be long and complicated processes, ones that would reveal more to the hierarchy and republics than we would like to. His eyes moved on to Rex. And in the case of Rex, well, as you stated, he is the head of state. Yeah, thanks for that, Rex said, his voice dangerously low. So why exactly shouldn't I head for Tuchanka, right now, and announce to the entire planet that the coalition is spitting on the memory of the woman who gave them a future? Because that's a generous interpretation of what you're doing right now. His eyes narrowed. You people were ready to offer her up like a piece of meat to appease the Turians and Solarians. Now you're doing the same to her memories. He spat onto the table. Just when I was starting to develop some respect for you people. Rex, your frustration is understandable, Anderson said, his voice carrying the tone of one trying to defuse a tense situation. However, we need to look at the bigger picture here. Not just for the coalition, but for the galaxy as a whole. The three of you have given so much to help the coalition, words can't describe our gratitude. This is the coalition Jane Shepherd served and fought for, the one her mother served and fought for. Ashley was certain she could see a tear trickling down Adam's face. Telling the truth only invites more death and destruction. Millions of people died in the 1-month war, hundreds of thousands died before it thanks to Saren. There's been enough suffering. So we lie? We use her memory? Lyra asked, sounding outraged. Deny that she was suffering? That she was lost and alone when she needed help? That you forced her under the authority of someone like General Hill for the majority of the war? Because I have no doubt that woman exacerbated the issue. The tension in the room was rising. More than a few of the coalition members of the Normandy crew had gotten over their initial shock and were now staring at the two admirals with steely eyes. Sadly, yes, Hackett said bluntly. This entire year has been one catastrophe after another. Eden Prime, coalition colonies threatened with orbital bombardment, the massacres on Cor Mali, every last atrocity that was committed on the Batarayan front of the war, the Yog army, and now the Citadel itself has nearly been destroyed. It needs to stop before we are plunged into even deeper depths and start seeing causality ratings on par with the Rachni Wars and Krogan rebellions. And Jane Shepherd just happens to be the Gurus began, but Ashley spoke. It was too much to bear. She had to interject. Gurus, she said. Lyra? Rex? Please. She wouldn't want us to start another war up just for her memory. Ashley hated herself for saying it. The soldier within her was screaming to make a stand, to throw every last foul insult that she could think of at Anderson and Hackett, damn the insubordination charges. Part of her wanted to be standing right beside her friends that were fighting tooth and nail over their dead leader. But if Ashley was being honest with herself, when she imagined Jane looking in on this room, she didn't see her beaming with pride at a crew that respected her. She could only envision a captain horrified at a fragile situation being torn apart. All heads turned in her direction. Many eyes blinked at her in surprise. Roger was looking at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. So, what? Gurus said, his voice sounding as if the air was being let out of it. We're just supposed to accept it. Ashley nodded. Just like that. What else can we do? Ashley asked. If we scream and rage for all the galaxy to hear, we get nothing good out of it. Nothing she would have wanted. At that moment, Ashley could see the fight go out of them. Rex still had fire in his eyes and Lyra and Gurus had yet to let go of their outrage, but the trio slackened. Ashley felt dirty. If either of the flag officers had said that, it would have incensed them even further. From her it was different, more sincere, loaded with less self-serving assumptions. She hated herself for it. For a moment, everyone was silent. Stubbornness was still burning in them, but it was more a refusal to admit defeat than overall defiance. She gets a memorial, Gurus said, with the tone of someone fishing for a concession. Share it with John if you can. He's earned it just as much as she has. And make it very clear that she still suffered, Lyra said. That she saved the Citadel despite everyone calling for her blood. Don't whitewash that, you're already blotting out enough. Hackett sighed. I will see what I can do. Can I take this as a sign that you will keep this information classified? He got a trio of reluctant nods as answers. Question, Karen said stiffly. What about Talai Zora and Volker Hoffman? They served under Jane throughout most of the war. Ashley's heart jumped. She had almost forgotten about the two of them. That is complicated, Anderson said. While his service is recognized, Volker is not a soldier of the coalition. It's uncertain if he's even legally a citizen, his entire situation is a gray area. Talai, meanwhile, is directly connected to the Quarian Admiralty. Letting too many people know in the coalition is something we're not confident in our ability to control, those outside the coalition. Anderson shook his head. Volker has made his intention to live outside of coalition territory clear. Our influence over the two of them is limited. They're both potential security risks. We can't. You can. And you will, Rex said, anger leaking out of his voice. Those are my terms. Figure out how to tell them. We'll talk to them, we'll make sure they don't tell anyone, Ashley said, struggling to keep her voice level. They'll understand. Neither of them are the type who'll start a war out of spite. Quarian culture is centered around the needs of the many, and Volker risked court-martial to stop pointless death. She paused. Please. Anderson looked at her long and hard. Very well. He wiped his eyes. Ashley could feel prickling at the back of her own. When would this be over? But only in person. Call them back, this isn't something we're willing to risk leaking over communication lines. But before we go any further, I do need all coalition personnel present to sign their non-disclosure agreements. Several glares were shot at Anderson, but nothing else was said. Slowly, Ashley opened her Omni tool, brought up the document, and traced her signature on it. With her example set, the others fell in line. One by one, each coalition member of the Normandy crew swore themselves to secrecy. Nora was the last to sign, refusing to make eye contact with anyone as she did. With that done, Hackett and Anderson looked them all over. Thank you, Anderson said. We've asked much of all of you, and this may be the most that we've asked. Your sacrifices will not be forgotten. I'm gonna make something very clear, Hackett, Rex said angrily. Your species saved mine from certain extinction. And as of right now, you can consider my debt to you paid. The Krogan don't owe you any favors, and if you ask me for so much as a shot of ring coal after this, I'll crack that fragile skull of yours. He gestured to the gathered members of the Normandy crew. Them? They're honored guests on Touch Anka for life. You? You don't step foot on my planet unless it's for official business, and even then, I'll only be tolerating you. Is there anything else you need, admirals? Nora asked, her eyes still drilling holes into the table below her. Her hands were clenching at her legs, nails digging in as if she were an apex predator greedily clawing at prey. No. You're all dismissed, Hackett said. And I think you've all earned 2 days of leave. Get some rest. Without a word, Nora stood up and strode out of the room, hands balled into fists. Roger and Cheryl shot quick glances at Ashley before hurrying out after her. Everything after that felt like the aftermath of the attack all over again. Slowly, disjointedly, everyone clambered to their feet. Many of them had dead, glassy eyes, looking as if automatic motor functions was the only thing separating them from corpses. They stumbled out, one by one, with no rhyme or reason to any of it. Ashley watched them all go. So. That was it. One final spit in the eye from this entire mess. Standing up, Ashley left without a word to either flag officer. She had spent her entire career thinking that she would follow in the footsteps of her father and grandmother, serving the coalition military until she was unable to physically do so anymore. That wasn't reality anymore. The second her EAS date rolled around, that was it. She was retiring. Logically, she understood why the coalition was doing what it was doing. It was smoothing out the aftermath of the war that had claimed millions of lives in a month, making sure that nothing else happened. That by doing this, millions of potential deaths were being averted. The rest of her didn't care. Her friend's memory had been smeared, used, violated. Ashley's breath caught in her mouth, shuddering. The tears wouldn't come for a bit, she was sure of that. But when they did, they would be hard and many. Possibly, they would last all night and a few more nights after that. The others would be the same. Nora might go so far as to break something. Her inner duty said that she had a responsibility to ensure that her crew stayed in line, but she simply couldn't summon the urge to care anymore. Whatever court-martial they could bring against her for failing to discipline her men would barely register compared to this. The others, how many of them would want to keep serving after this? How many of them had made the same decision she had just had, that the coalition could do without them? It was hard to say. But she couldn't help but imagine that there wouldn't be very many who would stay. Why would they? This was the end of the Normandy's crew. XXXXX. Jessica had killed 7 of those weak, emaciated cyborgs in the last 9 hours she had spent patrolling the lower wards of the Citadel. Slowly, they were starting to thin out, attrition claiming their numbers. Most of the hunter-killer forces that were hunting down the stragglers were moving in packs, but she had been cleared to head out on her own. Between her power armor and tactical cloak, it had been agreed that it was better that way. Kneeling down, she removed her knife from the throat of the latest one she had eliminated. It and 2 other cyborgs were now lying on the ground in the middle of what had once been a bustling shopping mall. At least 5 dozen dead now littered the ground. Much of them had gaping wounds from gunfire, burns from bizarre collector weapons, but some had been torn apart. Claws had torn open their guts, slashed apart their throats, or in 1 or 2 cases, torn apart down the middle. The sights saddened Jessica, but didn't turn her stomach. Her time with the Enclave and Goeth had hardened her to the sights of slaughter. The smell, however, was another story. She had never stayed around long after an operation, she and her sisters had always been long gone before the corpses had started to turn. At that moment, the reeking stench of dozens of corpses undoing hours of rot, combined with the unpleasant fluids leaking out of their mouths and nether regions, was making it near impossible for Jessica to not retch. Forcing herself to swallow, she pressed on. This area had been checked and cleared. Best to get out of here before she was sick. This is more, 5-minute check-in, nothing to, oh. No, it's nothing. Just bumped into a coalition operative. Over and out. Jessica stopped. A soldier in Enclave power armor, a super sledge at her sign and the Latin letter for Sigma painted on her shoulder. Cadence Moore. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other, expressionless helmet staring into expressionless helmet. So, Cadence said, awkwardly. Are you doing all right? When she had first seen the woman, Cadence wasn't sure what she had felt towards her. Confusion, uncertainty, and a sense of vertigo had all come crashing down on her at once. The moment she spoke, however, all of that parted to make room for a single, powerful emotion. Hatred. Hatred towards this woman, towards everything she stood for, to everything that she had ever done, including standing by a woman who had greenlit atrocities. Don't, Jessica said, her voice a raspy hiss. Don't you dare. I'm not your friend, don't treat me like it. Not after everything you've done. It was hard to spot someone stiffening when they were in a full set of power armor, particularly the bulky Enclave models, but Jessica still saw bits and pieces where Cadence became more rigid. I had nothing to do with what happened to your sisters, she said defensively, with a tinge of outrage. That flared Jessica's temper even more. Who had given her the right? I didn't even know that. I don't care, Jessica said, her arm shaking as she forced herself to slide her knife into its sheath. We were suffering, at the hands of the man who made you what you are. You knowing nothing doesn't mean anything. You didn't even bother trying to find out. And your friend, Warren. The man's face came clearly into her mind's eye. The insecure, pathetic, overly macho waste of space who had never missed a chance to pick a fight with Grace. Grace, who had been incapable of truly fighting back, but who postured as if she did. Grace had been tortured, mutilated, and indoctrinated for years. What was Warren's excuse? He made everything worse. And you just stood by. Albert and Warren are both dead, Cadence hissed. You're not the only one who's lost, but her words were cut off by a wet choke. Jessica didn't remember grabbing her by the throat, but as the vague feeling of the Enclave operative's soft, fragile windpipe through the tiny gap in her armor reached her mind, it felt good. It felt right. Cybernetic hands closed around the one choking Cadence, but they did nothing. A lack of oxygen was already starting to affect her, she couldn't fully focus. Albert and Warren. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. The mad dog and the older brother who couldn't keep him on a leash? Oh. Oh, what a tragedy. Her grip tightened, forcing a wheezing gasp out of Cadence as her already starved lungs were emptied. The only tragedy that happened on Surkesh was that the Yogg didn't finish the job that they started. All three of you should have died down there, but I'll settle for two. Them and the hundreds of thousands of others you lost down there. But you lived when Samantha Gowell died. You lived when my sisters died. And what do? You whine. Anger overtaking her, Jessica spun, slamming Cadence into a nearby wall, denting it and earning a weak cry of pain. Her struggles were growing weaker now, her eyes were starting to roll into the back of her head as her limbs went slack. For a moment, a single moment that felt as if it stretched on till eternity, Jessica considered finishing it. She would just need to choke her a little more until brain activity ceased, let her go see the brothers she cared so much about. But something stirred in the back of her mind. Not guilt, not a sense of moral wrongness, but an obligation. The coalition had freed her, given her a place to belong, restarted her life. And her murdering an Enclave operative would cause nothing but headaches and turmoil for them. Reluctantly, she let go. Cadence gasped for breath as she slid to the ground, her hands clutching at her throat. You don't know pain, Jessica said, her voice only just audible. You've only tasted it. Don't ever tell me that you've suffered when you and yours stood by and just watched while atrocities and torture happened under your watch. And just remember that the coalition only tolerates you because it needs all the friends that it can get. When you're worthless to them, I won't stop. With that, she brought her leg up and drove it straight into Cadence's abdomen. Between her cybernetics and her armor, the blow earned a screeching groan of metal on metal and a breathless gasp from Cadence. Frantically, she grasped up and undid her helmet, sending it clattering to the ground. Dry heaves echoed from her as she struggled to breathe. For the better part of a minute, there was nothing else. Then, finally, a deep, desperate inhale. Heaving heavily, she looked up at Jessica. Her expression wasn't what Cadence had been expecting. A bit of sadness and regret mixed in with the disbelief. A tiny part of Jessica prickled with guilt at what she had done. But it was a very small part of her. The rest of her was glowing in triumph. For years the Enclave had hurt her, tormented her, torn her and her sisters apart. This wasn't even close to making them even. Besides, she had picked a fight with an armed super soldier, not a defenseless teenager. Maybe if Cadence spent a decade begging for forgiveness, she would apologize for this. With that, she left the Enclave soldier on the ground, heading out to finish her patrol. XXXXX. Fuck, Folker whispered, for the 10th time that minute. He was pacing up and down the interior of the modified shuttle he and Talai had been living in ever since their departure from the coalition. When they had first left, he had welcomed the long trip to Quarian space from the Batarian front line. It was time alone with no one else except Talai. The low maximum number of light years per day the craft was capable of compared to the Normandy had been a blessing in disguise. No war, no one shooting at them, just a chance to safely let their guard down, watch a catalog of vids, and explore their budding relationship. Now the sluggish ship felt like a coffin and a prison cell rolled into one. The two of them had breathed a sigh of relief at the announcement of the ceasefire, hoping that this meant their friends were safe. Then word had come through about Saren's attacks. They couldn't go anywhere on the extranet without seeing pictures of the shattered arm floating in space, or the rising number of confirmed casualties. There had been no debate between them, they turned their shuttle around and headed straight for the Citadel. It had been an agonizing ordeal. Even with Talai pushing the shuttle to the limits of its capabilities, both legally and safety-wise, it had taken them a week to get there. The lack of communications made everything worse. Lines in and out of the Citadel were being heavily restricted to avoid them being swamped and hampering relief efforts. They had been unable to raise anyone from the Normandy, which had been the true hell of the long trip. Every news channel Folker and Talai said the same thing over and over again. Jane Shepherd was dead, they had lost both of the twins. The first few nights after that had been the hardest. Both of them had ended up crying themselves to sleep more than once, seeking what comfort they could out of each other, with Taylai pushing her new immune system to its limits. When the grief had passed over them, a raw panic had taken its place. What about the others? What had happened to them? They had gotten no answer, from the news feeds or from their many desperate attempts to contact officials from the coalition or Quarian end. Even Taylai's attempts to reach out to her father ended in dead ends, with Railzora having no better luck than they had. When they had finally reached the citadel, things had not improved. They had spent the better part of a day not even allowed to dock, but hover outside of the citadel well beyond the effective fire range of any ship while their request to land was processed. And they had been informed that they were bottom priority right now. Logically, Folker understood why. Aid ships were still streaming in through the mass relays, and a few hundred other shuttles, private freighters, and even a yacht or two were forming a mass outside of the citadel's reach, waiting just like they were. Most, if not all of them, were trying to reach their loved ones too. But knowing that there was a good reason for their waiting didn't make it any more bearable. Then, towards middle day on their second day waiting, a voice crackled over their comm line. Shuttle NA 94127? Do you read me? The voice on the far end sounded exhausted. Folker had no trouble imagining a heavy-lidded Solarian struggling to stay conscious as the chaos was just barely managed. We read you. Taylai, displaying more patience than Folker ever could, had been sitting at the controls and watching them like a hawk. Pouncing, she responded to the hail at once. Have there been any updates? Yet. Someone who gets paid way more than I ever will has moved you to the front of the queue. Don't ask me why, top secret, highest security, all that crap. Just land at Dock A82, sign what you're given, and do what you're told, all right. Folker glanced at Taylai, trying to see how she reacted to the blunt nature of the traffic controller. It was hardly the worst someone giving him orders had acted, at least a lugger wasn't being waved threateningly this time. If Taylai was bothered, however, she hid it well. Understood. Docking now. Typing complex controls into the shuttle that Folker still barely understood, Taylai stood up as the shuttle began an automatic descent towards one of the 4 remaining arms of the citadel. Without a word, she stood up. Her silver eyes looked into his, unobscured by a faceplate. They were raw, puffy, and an unpleasant tinge of purple. He couldn't look much better. Sleep has been infrequent lately, and interrupted commonly when it all became too much. Stepping forward, she pulled him into a tight hug. The favor was returned without a second thought. For several minutes, the shuttle accelerated to approach the station, then braking as it neared the docks. Even with her immune system strengthened, Taylai kept her full body suit on most of the time, only baring her face most of the time. Most of it was strong polymers designed to be vacuum sealed, but in many places soft purple fabrics had been sewn in. The Quarian people had a tendency to add touches of softness and warmth to their formerly cold and sterile lifelines. Folker had grown to cherish the feel and touch of that fabric, almost as much as Taylai's bare skin. For a moment, they stayed there, tightly intertwined. His hands gently gripped at the soft parts of her suit while her hands gently sifted through his hair. For a moment, the pain all fell away, it was just the two of them. Then, all too soon, the shuttle came to a clanking halt. Reluctantly breaking apart, they turned to face the door with one last look at each other. On the other side of the door, a quartet of heavy infantry, 2 standard and 2 metahumans, stood at attention, a man in a formal suit between them. Mr. Hoffman, Ms. Zora, he said briskly, nodding at each of them. There have been sensitive developments since your department. After much debate, considering that these matters involve your old colleagues, it has been decided that they can and shall be divulged to you, under controlled circumstances. What happened? Taylai said frantically. Is everyone okay? There have been no serious complications suffered by any of your former crewmates, the man said. His voice was infuriatingly controlled and monotone. But they are at the center of rather complicated affairs. They wish for you to be involved as well. Activating his Omni tool, the man brought up a glowing document. But before we can permit that to happen, I must ask the both of you to sign this non-disclosure agreement. I recommend you consider this carefully. The coalition is in the middle of drafting treaties between its allies as part of the war's ending. And while it is a process that we suspect will take months, possibly the better part of a year, we intend to ensure an extradition treaty is signed between us and the Quarian people. The coalition has every intention of acquiring the tools to enforce these NDAs. A sad look crossed his face. Don't sign these idly. What you'll be told if you do, you're expected to take to your grave. Folker exchanged another look with Taylai. Uncertainty had been eating away at them during their entire trip to the Citadel, a raw, all-consuming panic at the fate of their friends. Now a new uncertainty was hanging over them, one that replaced the overwhelming intensity with an uncomfortable emptiness. As horrible as the journey had been, the two of them had at least been aware of the possible worst outcome, their friends dead. But now? Now they were in an utterly alien situation, having no idea of what they were about to be sworn to silence on. Have the other members of the Normandy crew signed the same thing? Tailai asked. At once, the man gave a brisk nod. It was such a simple question, a deduction the two of them probably could have made on their own given 5 minutes to think and talk. However, with it answered, it changed the situation ever so slightly. This man, Folker didn't even know his position within the coalition, and he had not so subtly implied his willingness to jail the two of them if they didn't keep their silence. And the Normandy crew was in the same situation. Tailai and he signing would be falling in line with them, sharing whatever burden that they were struggling with. A great, howling void of uncertainty was spread out before them, and their friends were somewhere inside it. Together, not even needing to look at each other for confirmation, they stepped forward together. One after the other, they reached forward and signed, the display splitting in half into 2 separate documents. Idly, Folker noted that his was in German while Tailai's was in Aquarian script. Universal translators were mainly good for audio, not the written word. These had been prepared in advance for them. After a moment, the documents were signed. Very well, the man said. Follow me please. The walk through the citadel was brief and brisk. The heavy infantry tightly flanked the duo, never straying more than a foot away from them. A cavalcade of movement surrounded them, the docks choked with floods of workers running inward with full pallets and boxes of supplies, or returning with empty containers. Folker didn't see anyone that was hurt or dead. Enough time had passed for that to have stabilized and for the worst of it to be in the past, but there was enough frantic energy that he had little doubt that countless people were still fighting for their lives. A knightkin wearing the cross of the followers wouldn't be charging forward, clutching a crate marked with a red cross in each arm, otherwise. Upon leaving the docks, they broke off from the main flow of the relief workers, heading down a small side passage that was marked off, a holographic display in an alien language flashing above. The council had apparently not adjusted much of their warnings for coalition citizens. Most likely it was an authorized personnel-only sign. They continued down their path, finding themselves in a passage without windows or noticeable traffic, only the occasionally frantic alien clutching a daytop pad. Eventually, they reached a plain, unassuming door on the side of the narrow hallway. One of your crewmates volunteered to inform you. You'll find her inside. Knock when you're ready to leave. The man ended his brief explanation by pushing the door open. Inside was a room devoid of features aside from lights, a table, and chairs. A lone woman sat in the center, her head in her hands. Stirring at the door opening, Cornelia looked up with red, puffy eyes. With a clang as her chair was overturned, she crossed the room in a blur, throwing her arms around Folker and Tailai and pulling them close. Thank God, she whispered, her voice hoarse. You deserve to know. Know what? Folker asked. Cornelia, what's going on? They didn't tell us anything. Swallowing, Cornelia took a step back and gestured to the table. Slowly, they approached, the man closing the door behind them as they took a seat. Then Cornelia began to explain everything. And a tidal wave of horror came crashing down over Folker. Seconds slowed to a painfully slow crawl as the horrific truth was revealed to him. Jane Shepherd had let herself die. He had no idea how long it took for Cornelia to lay everything out. Minor details seemed to take an eternity for her to clarify, such as why the truth of her death had to stay a secret. All he knew was that every second felt like torture, a moment where he had to sit there and process the reality of what had happened. Eventually, Cornelia looked at them, wiping tears from her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. You left her with us and we couldn't help. I'm sorry. Folker stared at her in disbelief. To his right, he heard a choked noise as Tailai slowly started to cry. He had no doubt that, in a minute, he would be joining her. XXXXX. The funeral had been a quiet, tepid affair. There had been debates from within the coalition about making it a grand, broadcasted affair. Eventually, however, it had been decided that a private, closed funeral would be better for preserving the lie. Only the members of the Normandy crew and immediate family. That was why she was the only one there that hadn't been a direct subordinate of her children. Hannah Shepherd had forced herself to speak over the empty, symbolic coffins for both of her children. She didn't want to be there, she wanted to be anywhere else. Both of her children, dead. No one was looking at her as she spoke, with the exception of Ashley Williams. No doubt word had made way around the Normandy that their captain hadn't received a single letter from her mother regarding John's death. Hannah would have to carry that until her dying day. She had been too overwhelmed to write back to Jane, despite the several letters that had all but begged for some form of contact. She hadn't known what to say, had been terrified what she would have said had she replied. Along with the grief John's death had given her, resentment had filled her. Jane had been his CO. Why hadn't she done anything? Shame had kept that anger repressed, but she had been terrified of it growing, spreading, poisoning the way she looked at her daughter. Now though? It was all over. Both of her children were dead. She would never see them again. The back of her eyes stung with half-formed tears, but she blinked them back. Every last praise she could think of her children was flowing out of her mouth, but it sounded hollow. Everything she was saying was inadequate. Nothing but hollow platitudes were coming out of her mouth, utterly inadequate at describing what wonderful children she had had. Only simplistic praises seemed to come to mind: brave, selfless, driven, kind. It was all the type of meaningless drivel that you adopted by default when praising someone else's child. Then, before she had time to properly adjust, it was all over. Final words were said, the empty caskets were lowered into the soil of Eden Prime, and everyone present slowly departed. Eventually, Hannah was alone, except for Ashley Williams. Softly, she put a hand on the Admiral's shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. With that, she walked away. Hannah looked down. They were on a private lot of land purchased by the coalition specifically for these two. There were talks about a monument, but Hannah couldn't bring herself to care. Her children were gone. "Admiral." She turned around. Admiral Anderson was there in a black suit, a data pad in his hand, flowers in the other. "We're lesser now that we don't have them," he said, laying the flowers down on their grave. "Words can't describe how sorry I am." "They can't for me either," Hannah said, wiping away the tears that had started to form. "What is it?" Anderson sighed as he moved forward, holding the data pad out. "The update that you requested." Wiping her eyes one last time, Hannah took the pad. On it was a map of the galaxy with the borders of the countless galactic polities on it, as well as the position of fleets. The Krogan have begun colonization efforts of planets near the former DMZ. They've already laid claim to around a dozen, even if it's only with a handful of settlers. The Blood Pack has effectively become the official armed forces of the Krogan people. In response, the Turian hierarchy has increased the number of ships on its southern border to compensate. We also have reason to believe that they have begun construction on additional dreadnoughts that would push them beyond the limit permitted by the Treaty of Ferrixon. What is particularly concerning is we have gathered evidence of the hierarchy and the Union cooperating on joint research projects in regards to power armor, energy weapons, and most concerning, Reaper technology. Hannah's stomach clenched as Anderson continued. The Enclave, Quarians, and Geth are also all expanding. They appear to have an uneasy ceasefire. Fighting alongside each other against the Solarians has helped things a bit between them, but none of them truly trust each other. They're almost in a soft Cold War. On the other side of the galaxy, we're continuing to prop up the sovereign dominion of ADEK, but it's struggling and on the verge of economic depression. People only aren't leaving it because there's rumors that the hegemony is undergoing a minor civil war. We're still looking into it, but they appear accurate so far. On the more mundane front, the economic juggernaut that was the Asari economy is starting to slip. They earned no friends when they stayed neutral. Quite a few high-profile contracts between them and the other council races are being broken and economic sanctions are being imposed on them. Sanctions are also being imposed on the Elcor, but as their economy is mainly self-sufficient, it's having little effect. Some politicians are arguing we should use this opening to secure relationships with them, but public opinion of the Asari isn't very high right now. Oh. And no one knows where Matriarch Benazia is. I'm starting to suspect we won't for a long time, if ever. Admiral Anderson looked out over the map. "This is our galaxy now," he said somberly. "So much more free people, but less stable in many ways. And we have to hold it together." 1 month. The war had only lasted 1 month and yet it had done all of this. And now it fell to them to keep it from getting worse. Her children had died keeping the 1-month war under control. Or rather, as some people were already starting to call it, the pointless war. What was left for her to do aside from pick up the pieces? Not much. XXXXX. Author's note: I'm not dead yet. My writing energy has just been utterly dead. Yet, I have really mixed feelings about this story now, but I wasn't willing to let it die. This is the penultimate chapter, and I honestly feel like everything important has been covered here. The final chapter will be an epilogue that mainly exists to tie a bow around everything else, maybe answer a few more questions, but From the Ashes is basically over at this point. The epilogue will basically be there to show that, despite everything, the Normandy crew is all right. It's been one hell of a ride. I started this story in high school and now I've finished grad school. I've started another passion project and I've finished avoiding stupid deaths, opened and closed started working full-time, paid off my car and student loans, and I don't know what the future has for me. I wrote nearly 1 million words for this and wow, that's a lot. I have mixed feelings looking back at this story, as the early chapters are really rough at points. But I learned a lot writing this story, and it helped me grow oh so much as a writer. Thank you so much for sticking with me for so long through this crazy, stupid, ride. It's been so much fun. I'll see you at the ending. I would like to thank my legacy patrons, Superfeather Yoshi, Snanimihus, Raptorus Maximus, Davis Swinney, Mackenzie Buckle, Ryan Van Skok, Chaos Spartan 575, and Lord off not for their amazing support.